The globe under Roman's hand glowed brighter and brighter. He suddenly blushed. The priest stood in shock looking at how the ball turns golden. He thought that red is not orange. Usually it takes about 5 minutes to measure. The balloon glowed bright yellow. The priest stood there unsure of what to say, and then wondered what if Roman was even a 4-star swordsman, for the color to change at such a rate. Roman smiled as he looked at the glowing ball, and then thought that, apparently, he had reached the limit, according to the laws of this world. Then he should try it, as is customary in Murim. The aura around Roman grew bigger and bigger, and then the ball changed color to green. The ball pulsed, emitting incredibly huge waves of light. Then it suddenly cracked. Looking at this, the priest stood in shock. He couldn't even move, and then thought that he might go crazy. The aura meter cracked. If anyone asks what kind of thing the aura meter, it is the quintessence of knowledge that all the higher minds of the continent have contributed to. The meter is so strong that it can accurately scan even a 6-star swordsman's mana. Green is the limit. But if the mana still exceeds the allowed amount, the meter does not experience any failures. Roman calmly asked if it was possible that the balloon was defective, and the priest looked at Roman with a puzzled expression and replied that it was impossible. The priest looked at Roman with a puzzled look and went on to say that such a case was an exception, so he couldn't give a clear answer. Then he thought that right before it split open, the aura meter definitely glowed green. The priest, looking at the shattered ball, wondered what Dimitri's novel 4-star swordsman meant. He watched Roman exude an aura of unimaginable power, and then he thought that Roman wasn't a hidden dragon that hadn't flown yet, but an evolved monster. If you think about it, there was such a monster hidden in the Dimitri family. The priest was startled to think that the appearance of rankers who had the potential to rise to the 6th star in the arena would turn them upside down. Not just the Cairo kingdom, but the entire Salamander continent. The priest adjusted his glasses and then apologized to Roman. The priest approached the shattered ball and said that this was his first time doing this, so he couldn't make any sudden decisions, and he would report the results in the next few days. The priest thought that the purpose of the empire, with which the Temple of Valhalla was built on the territory of the Kingdom of Cairo, should be fulfilled. The priest told Roman that he was leaving. As the priest left, he thought that the novel was Dimitri, and he needed to find out more about it. The priest sat in his office and reasoned that Dimitri Roman, what he is, the last 25 years, his life has changed dramatically. Whether a person can change so much. The priest studied his reports carefully and thought that from the extermination of the Blood Fangs to the war with Barco, he had worked cleanly everywhere. The audacity that allowed him to risk other people's lives to carry out his own plans, and the ability to turn them into reality. Roman Dimitri has not only the fighting power of a monster, but also has the head on his shoulders to apply it. The priest reread his report that there are no problems with the aura measurement, but it can only be assumed that the ball darkened and cracked because it was damaged by an incommensurable force. The normal result is green. The priest got up from the table and said that he should report it right away. A blue magic portal appears in front of us, through which you can communicate from the portal. A voice is heard saying that this is Willis from the branch in Cairo. The priest says that he is nominating Roman Dimitri as a candidate for hiring. The Empire of Valhalla, not the barbarians, turned in battle. They knew what to do to gain status, and they came up with a way to attract foreign talent using the so-called Empire Tradition rating system. The warrior of each country considered it an honor to get into the rank and nurtured the dream of becoming a ranker. Thanks to this, the Valhalla Empire was able to find talents even without having large human resources. A man in a white cape covering his face was communicating with the priest via a magical message, saying that Roman should definitely be obtained, promoted to a rank, and found a way to recruit him. The man in the white cape repeated once again that when sending soldiers from abroad, first of all it is necessary to observe safety. He told the priest that he had to make Roman like him as easily as possible. The priest put his hand on his heart and said that he obeyed. He will tell the Dimitri family that the aura meter was malfunctioning, that Dimitri and the swordsman had 3 stars instead of 4, and they will end up unofficially assigning him 100th place. Priest Echidna smiled and went on to say that since a small kingdom like Cairo is making a big fuss just because someone is on the list at all, we are transported to the next day, when the kingdom of Cairo is turned upside down by Willa's announcement that the youngest ranker is born. We are transported to the capital Cairo, a rich city with a rich infrastructure. A person writes a document and asks that it is true. The butler replies, holding up the papers, that yes, a priest from the Temple of Valhalla personally visited Dimitri and confirmed that Roman is a 3-star swordsman aura, and that he did indeed defeat Homer. We are confronted by a man with gray hair and expensive clothes, a powerful man of the central government, Marquis Benedict, whose butler informs us that, however, in his opinion, Homer was careless and was defeated before he could show a 4-star aura. The Marquis, sitting at his desk, asked the butler how old Roman Dimitri was this year. and the butler answered 25 years old. The Marquis was surprised to say that by the age of 25, the 3-star level, an amazing nugget had appeared on the market. Marquis C frowned, then asked what about the movements of other forces. The Marquis glanced at the map, and the butler continued that everyone immediately took action, with both empires being particularly active. The Marquis was indignant, and then shouted that the damned imperial authorities. This talent appeared in Cairo, but they have the audacity to get close to him before them. The current kingdom of Cairo is divided into 4 factions. The royal faction that governs the country, the faction of the aristocrat, the main one being Marquis Benedict, the faction of the close associates of the Kronos Empire, and the faction of the close associates of the Valhalla Empire. Such was the reality of the small state of Cairo, the Marquis pondered, telling the butler to hurry up and send people so that other authorities wouldn't take Roman Dmitri away from them. The Marquis smiled, then added, especially the royal family. No way, they can't let it fall into their hands. We are being transferred to the front line in the west of the Cairo kingdom. The kingdom of Cairo borders the Kronos Empire to the west, and the kingdom of Hector to the south. The Kronos Empire, which owns 2 of the continent's largest mountain ranges and is the birthplace of Emperor Alexander, demanded that the kingdom of Cairo become part of it. And for several years now, it has been resolutely attacking the borders. On the front lines, the soldiers of Cairo died, and inside the country, traitors to the motherland, being supporters of Kronos, encouraged everyone to surrender. Someone looks at the pile of corpses and then says, "Damn imperial dogs." A young man in a red uniform standing next to his friend said that they fought for the sake of the country, but did not even have the right to a normal funeral. The guy said, "Rodwell, are you okay?" Before us appears a young man in a red uniform with brown hair. This is the second son, Dmitri Rodwell Dmitri. He answers his friend that he is already used to it, but he has been cooking in it for more than a day or 2. His friend, putting his hands behind his head, says that he did not know that the realities of the front are so terrible. He thinks 10 times a day to send this diploma to hell and return to his homeland. Rodwell throws a torch at the pile of corpses. The pipes are instantly lit, and the guy and Rodwell are watching it. Rodwell wondered as he looked at the burning corpses that this was the pathetic reality of a small state. Because of the external forces targeting Cairo, there wasn't a day that passed quietly in the west of the front line. A guy with green hair asks Kalia if he has heard the news. His older brother Roman has risen to the rank of rancor. Rodwell remembers Roman with a frown. Rodwell clenches his fist and wonders if Roman has really risen to the level of 3 stars. No, his brother from his memories is simply not capable of this. Rodwell tells his friend that this is all nonsense. He doesn't know what kind of trick his family is using, but it's not that he can't even protect himself as a rancor. Looking at the raging flames on the corpses, Rodwell replied that the truth would be revealed very soon. We are taken to the estate of Dmitri. Hans says that a foreign guest has arrived to see Roman. A man in a green robe with a hat on his head told Roman that they would get right to the point. He was serving His Majesty King Cairo. A foreign guest sits back and says with a smile that the reason for his visit is to choose Roman as the royal knight of Cairo. 4 factions of the Cairo. We have started direct actions. In order to get Roman's dragon lurking on the outskirts, Roman looked at the foreign guest and smiled. Royal knights, being in the royal guard protecting the king of a country, is the highest honor allowed to a knight. The foreign guest told Roman that he would answer honestly. This is an extremely rare case when someone is personally offered to become a royal knight. Usually such an honor can only be awarded after passing a strict selection controlled by the royal family. The foreign guest said with a smile that Mr. Roman, of course, if Roman now goes to the capital and swears allegiance to His Majesty, he will be able to join the guard without any tests. Roman dryly replied that this was all. The foreign guest did not expect such an answer, and asked Roman if he really refused. Roman calmly replied that isn't it obvious that he, as the eldest son of the Dmitri family, is happy with his life and does not experience any hardships. So why should he move to the capital, complicating his life, and become a royal knight? The foreign guest, frightened, objected to Roman that by becoming a royal knight, Roman would receive a personal estate in the capital, and the Dmitri family would be granted a large high title. Roman asked that this is the maximum of the royal family. The foreign guest, opening his mouth in surprise, asked again with a shout that this is the maximum of the royal family. The foreign guest suddenly jumped up from his chair and slammed his hand on the table, shouting that it seemed to him that Roman was very much mistaken. His Majesty wanted to get Roman into the ranks of the guard because he highly appreciated his future potential. The title of a royal knight, a new title, and an estate of the capital. In the current situation of the novel, such an award is already a permissible luxury. He replied that it was not he who was mistaken here, but the guest, and the foreign guest shouted out what Roman was talking about. Roman said that 5 days ago, Count Gregory's man came to him, They promised him an estate in the capital, thousands of yen of land, and a mountain of jewelry if he would fasten them to loyalty. Roman, looking at the naughty foreign guest and continuing to say that they also wanted to be related by political marriage, the foreign guest thought that the brats from the Kronos Empire faction had already made their move. Roman continued to say 3 days ago the Denver family mouth. They wished to become his patron, and overseas guest thought that the Denver family name belongs to the Valhalla Empire faction. Roman went on to say that just last night he met with a man from the Benedict family. They put forward a much more stunning proposal. They promised to triple what the other families had promised, and within a month to make Dmitri the family line of Viscounts. The foreign guest thought that it was all over. Then he lowered his hands and whispered that they were one step too late. Suddenly, a foreign visitor shouted that even so, if Roman could not choose them, all the people Romana mentioned are terrible traitors who only sleep and see how they will stroke the whole kingdom. A man appears in front of us, who is covered in an incredibly strong blue aura, and the foreign guest continues to shout that at least thanks to the captain of the Royal Knights, nicknamed Swordsman Cairo, they are still able to suppress attempts at rebellion. The foreign guest looked at the calm Roman and continued to say that the royal power is already occupied. The laws are deaf and blind to them, and it is difficult for the royal family to fix it. The overseas guest despaired, then continued that Cairo is a small state, and to tell the truth, even their offer might displease the nobility. The only thing they can promise is a royal knight's seat. The foreign guest went on to say that while he was stepping on his pride, he was still begging Roman if he could share his strength for his majesty the king. Roman smiled and thought that 4 forces against 1 kingdom, for him 12 sons of the heavenly demon, is an extremely familiar situation. Romana smiled, crossed his arms, and said that the offer of the past 3 ambassadors and the royal power had never sounded enticing to him, so they were going to accept none of them. Romanov looked at the happy ambassador and said that besides, now it is not in his plans to act on moral principles. The ambassador thought that there is still hope. Roman got up and said that for today it was better to go out on the word. The happy ambassador replied that how is Roman doing? The ambassador then bowed his head and said that he would look forward to the day when Roman would pledge his allegiance to his majesty. The 4th offer, the 4th refusal, Roman did not plan to bend the knee to any of the authorities. Roman, smiling, thought that if they were going to be enemies anyway, it would be better to stall for time, keeping their distance with all their strength. This is the only sure way. A wooden sword appears in front of us. Roman, out of breath in training, wipes off his sweat, when suddenly someone says to him that let me introduce myself. A young man in a black suit with a white shirt bends down in front of Roman and says that he is Makin from the Valhalla Intelligence Agency. Looking at him, Roman thinks that Valhalla, in the uniform of a servant Dmitri. Roman asks Maki what's going on. Roman glares at the young man, leaning on his sword, and asks if he hasn't already expressed his opinion to the Denver family a couple of days ago. Makin anxiously replies that first of all, he apologizes for using such an unsightly method for the meeting, and then reflects that Roman has frightening eyes. Makin once again bends down in front of Roman and says that then, because of the outside views around, he had to abandon the usual methods, and therefore let Roman consider that Valhalla is serious. Makin stretches out his hand and says that Valhalla has fallen in love with Roman's potential, but citizenship is not something that can be easily solved. Moreover, it will be difficult for Roman to leave the family, because he has accumulated considerable wealth. Along with the title of Viscount, they give Roman a fertile land that includes a mountain with iron deposits. Then Roman will be able to preserve the traditions of blacksmithing. Roman stiffened a little, and then thought that continuing the family business would be a good idea. Makin continued to say with a big smile that the most valuable thing for Roman as a swordsman is the opportunity to become stronger. We are presented with 2 pillars chained together with a magic circle in the center. Makin goes on to say that Roman will be granted special access to the 1st level Valhalla vault. Roman looks at Makin with a dumbfounded expression, and Makin goes on to say that Valhalla's private vaults contain spiritual instructions, sword techniques, and other legacy of past generations. Storages are divided into several levels, depending on the value of the content. With the exception of special level storage, the highest level is considered to be the 1st level storage. In the future, Valhalla will conquer the entire continent and ascend to the top as the only empire. Staying in the kingdom of Kira is the shortest way to say goodbye to life. Makin added that Valhalla has a bright future ahead of it. Let Roman join their ranks, then he thought that a weighty reward and a suitable threat. A wise person will definitely accept their decision, but Roman sighed and said that he refused. Makin was horrified, then asked if the novel was serious. Roman calmly replied that he refused not because he was not satisfied with the conditions, or because of loyalty to the country. Makin asked why. Roman replied that he had recently received many suggestions on how to increase his own value. Roman told Mackin to think about the current situation of the Cairo kingdom. Royal Knights, Marquis Benedict, Earl Gregory, Earl of Denver. Roman must not just swear allegiance to one of the four forces, but decide for sure who his future steps will be. And now, he stands at a crossroads. He does not need verbal suggestions. He wants to personally test with time if there is any point in risking his life. Mackin looked at Roman dumbfounded. Roman wondered what it would mean to present himself in the eyes of others as an honest person, completely devoted to the country. In Mackin's eyes, Roman seemed like a man who was hard to get down on one knee. But if he gives his heart, he will be faithful to the oath until the end of his days. It touched Mackin, who didn't even know it was intentional. Mackin beamed happily, then replied that he didn't know how Roman planned the meeting, but they couldn't wait too long. He hopes that Roman will be reasonable and not take too long to respond to their suggestions. Romano smiled and said yes. Mackin paused as he left, then shouted again. He said that he had prepared a gift for the sake of their future connections. He smiled mischievously, and then told Roman to avoid the southern front line. This place was like a time bomb that could go off at any moment. We are transported to Romana in a red raincoat, who is standing in front of her father, mother, and Hans, who is wiping away tears. Roman, standing in full combat gear, says that he will return safe and sound. Romero replies that it's fine. Then Roman turns around and leaves. Roman's mother tells Romero not to worry so much. This isn't the western front line that borders Kronos after all. Roman was assigned to the quiet southern lands. She is confident that Roman will return safely. Romero replied that he knows. He looked after Roman as he left and said that it was his son. His chest couldn't stop fluttering. Roman said with a smile, "Go ahead." His men shouted in unison, "Yes, sir." At that time, no one knew what Roman's campaign to the southern front line would turn out to be. We are being moved to the final stronghold of the southern front line. Roman rides into town on horseback and says that today they will rest here, and tomorrow at dawn they will move to the southern barracks. The soldiers shout in unison to eat. They go through the city carrying a box. One of them says that they rented an inn for them, and the rest of the aristocrats distribute their soldiers to camps. Roman, reading the paper, hears shouts from behind the door. Roman, coming down the stairs, saw a frightened Chris and Kevin shouting to them that they were pathetic ragamuffins, whether they knew who he was. The boy raised his hand and shouted that this gentleman was the second son of the Elbert family. Henry Elbert, a short knight with pink hair and a rather plump build, appears in front of us, pointing to himself, beaming with happiness. We are taken to Roman, who carefully read the letter, and the news has reached him that Roman is performing military service, and he understands Roman's desire for selflessness in the name of the country. But he can't watch someone who might become his man in the future, fighting in a foreign land, risking losing his life. He pulled the strings a little so that Roman was assigned to the southern front. Let Roman remember that the Benedict family will always be waiting for him, Roman reflected, looking at the large number of letters lying on the table. After all, they have been asking for several months, but they are still persistent in their poaching. Most likely, the Marquis, head of the aristocratic faction, will not want to let him go. After all, there is no one better than Roman who could fight back against the Royal Knights. The southern front, unlike the Marquis, who thinks that it is calm there, is the intelligence department of Valhalla. The southern front responded as if it were a time bomb that would explode at any moment. Roman will understand this for himself when he personally encounters it. We are taken to a guy who held up a finger and shouted that this gentleman was the second son of the Elbert family. Chris listened to Henry with a heavy sigh. Henry shouting that the descendant of the famous family of the Cairo kingdom was telling them that he was becoming a permanent court. How dare the rootless scum oppose him? Roman walked up to Chris and asked what was going on. Chris is upset. He says that this sir claims to take over the inn and tells them to get out. And he tells him that they have rented the whole building. But he keeps insisting. Roman thought, looking at this chubby young man, that the family mouth is Albert. The family no longer has a reputation. The guy talks too much, taking advantage of past merits. I don't care if he's famous, though. Roman asked why they had to leave. Henry pointed at Roman in disgust and asked if he owned them. Roman replied that this was so that Roman would then turn a blind eye to the situation. He doesn't know what family Roman is from. But since everyone is heading for the southern barracks, Roman should know that it won't do any good to make him angry. Henry glared at Roman and said that he would give them exactly 10 minutes to pick up their trash and get out of sight. Roman thought that this was the reality of a provincial family, and then calmly replied that he was not going to leave the inn. He pulled out his sword, then added that there was an easy way to solve a problem like this. Roman looked at Henry in anger, pointing his sword at him and telling him to draw his sword too. Roman's eyes pierced right through Henry, and then Roman added that if Henry defeated him, then he would gladly give up the inn to him. Henry gritted his teeth and shouted, "How dare Roman!" One of the knights standing behind Henry noticed something and immediately became very frightened. He ran up to Henry and shouted that he had better stop immediately. Henry indignantly asked what the knight was talking about. The knight continued to say that it was a romantic man. He gave Henry a startled look and replied that Roman had recently entered the ranking as the youngest ranker. Henry wondered if this boy was the same Roman. Henry looked at Roman, a terrifying aura emanating from him, and he wondered if Roman was the youngest ranker of Cairo, and during the war with Barco, he killed his eldest son right in front of the head of the family. Roman's eyes were burning, and he was suppressing the demon who knows no pity, Roman Dmitri, with his aura. Roman looked at the terrified Henry and asked why he didn't draw his sword, and Henry wondered if he was dead. He will die as soon as he unsheaths his sword. Henry said desperately that there was a mistake, and that Roman had to wait. He completely forgot that he had made an appointment. Henry, standing nervously in front of Roman, told him to let Roman believe that Henry was apologizing for this incident, and they would end there. And then he added that if he had his way, he would be for neglecting the Elbert family. Roman silently came up close to him, which greatly startled Henry, who screamed in shock. Then he flew out of the inn at high speed. Roman shot a cold look after him. And then I thought that this is the reality of the Southern Front. That day, there were 3 similar situations. But as soon as they heard Roman's name, they were blown away like the wind. We are taken to Roman, who is sitting at the bar in front of him, and there is a woman who says that this happens often here. Unlike on the Western Front, it is not dangerous on the Southern one, because of the main relations with the kingdom of Hector. The woman, picking up a barrel of beer, smilingly replies that this is why all the sons of the aristocracy who did not manage to avoid military service go out of their way to get to the Southern Front, called the resort. No one bothers me with training, and my life is not in danger. This is the best place for military service of aristocrats. Roman listened carefully to her story. Then, in the evening, Roman revealed the map. And I carefully analyzed it 48 days ago. The intelligence of the Hector kingdom crossed the state border. They immediately returned as soon as they checked the situation on the Southern Front. Even after that, as many as 3 times more intelligence was seen checking the Southern Front. It is not yet confidently stated that they are planning to start a war, but even if we judge from the last fragmentary information, the current Southern Front is no longer so safe. Roman smiled, and then said to himself, war means. On the tip of my nose, I imagined the familiar smell of blood. We are taken to a man who says he is their commanding officer, Viscount Bale Frank. Bale goes on to say that in the Southern barracks, the soldiers assigned to the Southern Front, they will be trained in the military as. The nobles barely listened to him and yawned. They didn't care. They wanted to get home as soon as possible. Bale continued to say that after 3 weeks of training, they would form a reserve army in which they would spend the rest of their service. Of all of them, Roman was the only one who listened attentively, and Bale continued to say that regardless of their title before serving, they were only soldiers in the barracks, performing military duty if someone broke the rule or decided to act on their own. As a punishment, he would be sent to the Western Front. Bale was standing in front of the aristocrats. They were all small and flimsy, only Roman stood out among them. Roman, hearing this, sighed heavily and thought that this is called punishment. Who is capable of such a thing? All of a sudden, he saw the 2 nobles listening intently to Bale after hearing about the punishment. Bale went on to say that in the evening they will be notified of the training schedule. They can go to unpack at their new place of residence. Suddenly, one of the soldiers approached Roman and said that the commander would like to meet Roman alone. Bale greeted Roman with a big smile, telling him to hurry up and then asking him that the journey to the Southlands wasn't too tiring for him. Roman said no, everything went great, then sat down on the couch. Bale laughed and then told Roman to make himself comfortable. Bale put a cup of tea on the table and asked if Roman knew how excited he was when he found out that Roman had been assigned here. Roman Dmitri, the youngest ranker of the Cairo kingdom, the news that there was an undisclosed genius in the Dmitri family stirred him up. And to be honest, he called Roman separately to clarify something. Roman calmly answered yes. And then Bale anxiously asked that it was true that Marquis Benedict had made a fuss to have Roman assigned to the Southern Front. Roman, drinking a cup of tea, replied that yes, although he did not ask for it, but he had heard that Marquis Benedict had done it. Bale smiled, then said this. He thought that Marquis Benedict would try hard to curry favor with Roman if he established a relationship with him beforehand. He will have a chance to get into the central government. Bale happily said that they would go straight to the point. He wanted to prove himself in front of the Marquis. The South Barracks is also quite good, but it doesn't compare to the luxurious life of the central government. So as long as Roman is here, he should take good care of it so that Roman doesn't feel lacking in anything. Roman looked at Bale with a puzzled expression. Bale added that in return, when Roman later sees Marquis Benedict, he can say that Viscount Bale Frank of the South Barracks provided the Romanovs with all the amenities. That will be enough. Romanu smiled, and then reflected that this was a rather frank statement, and he had no particular reason to refuse. Roman came out of Bale's office, and someone shouted from the end of the corridor, "There you are, brat." In front of Roman, Henry was out of breath, shouting that Roman had touched the wrong person, whether Roman knew who his maternal relatives were, the Frank family line. And then Henry added that Viscount Bale Frank was his uncle, and now Romana realized that he had made a mistake. Roman calmly asked, "And now that his uncle the barracks commander?" Henry Takaya pointed a finger at Roman, desperately said that Roman was not aware of the situation. Henry yelled at Roman to stand there and wait. They would see if Roman could stay as confident as he was now, and then Henry ran into his office shouting, "Uncle." Bale was asking Henry what had upset his nephew so much. Henry asked me what Bale would do if some turnover of the Baron's family threatened my life. Bale indignantly shouted that which was bullying Henry. Roman stood silently in front of Bale's office. Bale stormed out of the office in a rage, shouting, "Who dares touch his nephew? Uncle Henry will level him to the ground." Henry happily said that this one is right under the door. Bale and Henry stormed out of the office, and then there was a moment of silence. A few seconds later, Bale slapped Henry's cheek with great force. Henry, falling to the ground, dropped his tooth and desperately asked his uncle. Henry happily runs towards Bale and shouts, "Uncle." Bale, smiling a big smile, looks in Henry's direction and shouts, "Nephew." Since childhood, they had been very close. Bale had done everything Henry asked. There was a time when Henry had come to love his uncle more than his parents, and now he was lying on the floor in the hallway, looking at Bale with a puzzled expression. There were tears in Henry's eyes, and his left hand was holding his red cheek, which was hurting a lot. Then he whispered, "Uncle." Bale turned to Roman and said that this was a bad thing. He was very sorry. Then he thought that his opponent was Dmitri Roman. He was favored by the Marquis Benedict, and it was not known what heights he would reach in the future. Bale told Roman that he should have taken a proper approach to raising his nephew and let Roman allow him to apologize instead of him. Roman indignantly put his hands on his belt and replied that for his sake he would turn a blind eye to what happened. And then he added that then let me decline. And Bale said thank you. Bale shouted furiously, "What a fool. The novel was being looked after by Marquis Benedict himself. What was the benefit of having such a person outside of others?" Henry, rubbing his cheek and shaking with fear, asked that it didn't matter how Bale could have hit him. Bale got down on one knee and took Henry by the shoulders, then asked that when he was older, if he acted like the Albert family here, he wouldn't be able to protect him. Bale suddenly had an idea. And then, with a smile, he told Henry that what had happened today might have left Roman with a bad impression of them. So from now on, from training to forming the reserve army, he would introduce Henry to Roman. Henry looked at Bale with a puzzled expression, and Bale continued to tell Henry to do whatever he wanted, but to start a friendship with Roman, so let him remember if Henry didn't listen to him. Then he would send Henry to the Western Front, and when Henry heard about the Western Front, he was terrified. We are taken to Roman's bedroom. Roman reflected that the private room, Viscount Bale had done his best, was quite easy to manage for people who didn't hide their ambitions. Life in the South Barracks promises to be quite good. We are taken to a large building. The man sits studying the papers, and then says that he can't believe that his fate is preparing aristocrats for the war games. 3 years ago a veteran soldier who had distinguished himself on the Western Front line. This man with a scar on his nose and an officer's uniform was the chief instructor at McBurney Barracks South. McBurney wondered if his loyalty to the kingdom alone had led him to volunteer for the Western Front, and he had fought dozens of battles to defend the kingdom of Cairo over the course of a decade. Starting from the very bottom, he rose to the rank of commander, leading an army of 100 people, but just a moment separated him from falling into the abyss. During a fierce battle defending the Western Front, he lost his right hand, in which he held a sword. At that moment, the realization that his life as a warrior had ended ingloriously tormented him more than the boiling pain. The commander, sitting across from McBurney, said that in recognition of his military exploits, he was going to appoint him as an instructor at South Barracks. McBurney desperately listened to the commander's words that although he would have to leave for the battlefield, he hoped that there he would continue to work for the good of the kingdom of Kira. It was agonizing, but he decided to accept the reality, and McBurney replied with a huge sadness in his chest that he was listening. However, the training system that greeted him upon arriving at the barracks was in complete disarray. Everyone in the Western Barracks was training as equals, and the aristocracy of the Southern Barracks was completely exempt from training. As McBurney watched the rest of the aristocracy outside the window, he realized that he had planned out a clear training system, starting with 3 weeks of basic endurance training. But what's the point if the aristocrats commanding the soldiers don't want to train? McBurney stepped forward and said that he should at least pretend that training was going on. The aristocrats outside the window were talking. One of them asked, "Really?" The other said that he would come to his possession and he would show him what real pleasure is. His friend replied that he promised. The aristocrat replied that he was always happy to visit the brothers. McBurney walked briskly past the aristocrats. McBurney wondered what idleness was, even though they were on the front lines, and then added angrily that he was so sick of it. Suddenly, when he reached the place where the training sessions were being held, something dumbfounded him. In front of McBurney stood Roman with his warriors who were ready to train. Chris and Kevin stood in silence in the blazing sun, and McBurney wondered if they would be here in the South Barracks. Someone lined up in perfectly straight lines, also with the commander. Isn't he familiar with the South Barracks yet? McBurney walked up to Roman and said, holding out his hand, that the South Barracks didn't force aristocrats to train. McBurney smiled and added that if Roman wanted to rest, he could sit in the shade with the others and watch the training sessions. Roman looked somewhere to the left and asked why they were doing this. McBurney chuckled as he looked at the aristocrats sitting in the shadows, who were discussing something furiously, and replied that Roman was right. Roman then angrily replied that enemy attacks on the battlefield don't divide people by status, and the war isn't just taking place on the plains, mountains, rivers, swamps, and so on. In order for a commander to fulfill his duties regardless of the landscape, he must at least not be inferior to his soldiers in strength. This means that the commander who is responsible for giving orders must also be trained. McBurney stood in front of Roman, listening to him say that, in addition to training, the novel involves a process that will help soldiers reach their potential and gain experience. McBurney was puzzled to think that Roman had a perfect understanding of the purpose of training. Roman said that's why he doesn't need those ingratiating smiles in front of him. He's ready to drop his status and go through any training McBurney wants. McBurney reflected that this was the first nobleman he could remember who was willing to practice properly. And McBurney felt sorry for the fist and added that people would risk their lives for those who's willing to admit it. He was going to offer a compromise in training, but now McBurney turned around and walked to the podium. McBurney, with a serious face, reflected that he should give it his all in these 3 weeks. He took a deep breath. Then he shouted that they would start the first week of endurance training. McBurney's determination opened the door to the practice rooms. Roman and his soldiers were running along the forest path with a heavy load on their backs. Kevin and Chris could barely keep up with Roman, their strength running out, and McBurney shouted that the purpose of this training was to prepare for the outbreak of a surprise war, so that they could always and everywhere react quickly. McBurney held up his hand and shouted that from now on they would run uphill every day, regardless of the weather. One of the soldiers panted and said, "What the hell? These guys are like that," watching Roman's squad run away. Roman swung his sword, exposing his torso, and McBurney shouted that this was a mental battle where they didn't know when the war would end. All the wars swung their swords over and over again, and McBurney said that with unlimited backswing training, they had to go beyond their limit. Romana now looked at McBurney while waving his sword as he said that anyone who gave up in the middle would have their training extended by reducing their sleep time. One of the soldiers sighed and said that now you can live. His comrade replied that he was told that in the southern barracks there is a freebie. All this is a lie. A small number of soldiers were on the bank of the river, washing up after a hard day. One of them said that no one had warned him that they would be driven away from the first day, and thanks to some it only became tougher. One of the soldiers shouted to his comrades that let's not overdo it. Let them know how to use their fervor. There are others besides them. The soldier sat on the beach and complained that they, unlike him, were called up for service. If they had enough time, they could do it too. He looked at the back of the pumped-up guy and said that it is clear that due to the short training period, there is a difference between them. The pumped-up guy did not answer what the short period means. And then the bulky guy turned to the soldier. It was a native of Lawrence, Henderson. He sternly asked the soldier how long he had trained. The soldier replied in fright that they had only been training for a year. Of course, they would be inferior to them who had been training for several years. Henderson replied that the soldier had misunderstood something. Their first training session started 3 months ago, and the soldier says that he was unable to prepare due to lack of time. Henderson glared at the soldiers and told them not to make excuses. They just didn't give it their all. The day Henderson saw the recruitment announcement, he made up his mind. Become a person of the novel Dimitri. Henderson clenched his fist and thought that recruitment for personal soldiers was unlikely to require serious qualifications, but this was a huge misconception. At the staggering terms of Roman's offer, veteran mercenaries like Lucas and Fuca came running in. Henderson was surrounded by predators at the time, turning into a herbivore. Startled, he wondered if he could. At least something will do in this place. Henderson approached Chris and apologized, saying that he didn't think he was worthy to accompany Mr. Roman. Chris, she asked why Henderson decided that. Henderson replied that Chris knew the reason perfectly well. He was just a novice. You don't really know how to hold a sword in your hands. Henderson looked at the floor and said that he had been engaged in farming all his life. It was too arrogant of him to decide to follow Mr. Roman. Chris asked if Henderson gave up only because he was inferior to others in terms of level, and Henderson said that he was. And then Chris said that when he first met Kevin, the guy had nothing but anger in his eyes. Honestly, he didn't understand why the master picked up a boy from a poor family. Henderson looked at Chris with a puzzled expression. And then Chris asked what about the current Kevin? In such a short period of time, he turned into a warrior that no one dares to ignore. Funny, but even he was the same. At his first meeting, he blindly attacked Mr. Roman and almost lost his front teeth. Back then, he was no better than a frog stuck in a well, and just like Kevin, he had changed thanks to Roman's guidance. Let Henderson listen carefully. It was Roman's decision to recruit him as a soldier, and even if Henderson is pathetic now, he can grow up just like him and Kevin. Henderson looked at Chris when he said that it was because their master was the one who would give Henderson this opportunity. Henderson clenched his fist, said he honestly couldn't believe it, but Henderson swung his wooden sword and slammed it into the ground, saying that if this man had chosen him from the crowd of volunteers, then there was a reason for it, and it was still hard for him to imagine how he, a simple farmer, would become stronger. Henderson told Chris that, as he had said, he would rely on the master's foresight. Since then, his life began to change. After a few months, he gave everything to training. He was sick, he fainted, but despite everything, I tried my best to catch up with my comrades, and eventually he was able to become what he is now. Henderson stood in front of a soldier and asked him what war meant to him in general. Soldier Task now looked at Henderson and couldn't say anything. Then Henderson went on to say that when he was standing on the border of life and death, where you can only survive by killing, he would also say that he couldn't fight because there wasn't enough time to prepare. Henderson furrowed his brow and added that by recognizing their weakness, they not only try to become better, but also pull others down with them. He sees no reason to comply with their pathetic request. The soldier gritted his teeth, and all of his comrades drooped. Henderson left them and said they were pathetic assholes. In their hearts, Roman soldiers had already started a war. Roman's squad ran along the forest path every day with a load on their back. Hard endurance training continued, and the difficulty only grew with each passing day. But Soldier Roman gritted his teeth. We went all the way to the end. The aristocrats were sitting under the trees in the shade, and one of them said that he didn't understand why they were trying so hard. He would have understood if it was the Western Front, but isn't the Southern one far from war? One of the nobles said that they were wasting their energy where they didn't need to, because of their pathetic background. If I didn't do at least that, where they wouldn't be able to get recognition at all. The nobles laughed and said it was true. Henry, sitting in the shade, wondered what the hell, how he was going to get Roman's favor. He glanced at Roman, who was standing there waving a wooden sword, and then he thought that it would be great to associate with other aristocrats, to make friends with them. Henry's brow furrowed, and then he sighed heavily and wondered what to expect from a commoner. Henry yawned loudly, and then said that it would work out somehow. We are being transported to the kingdom. A middle-aged man with a scar on his cheek and eye, wearing a commander's cloak, appears in front of us. He says that he is reporting. This is the commander of the Ranger Squad, Jackson. An elderly king sat on a throne in front of him, and Jackson, kneeling on one knee, said that over the past year, a group of Rangers, in total, entered the territory of the Southern Front 48 times and studied the 5 lines of defense. According to the study, all forces were sent to defend the Western Front in the confrontation with the Kronos Empire, and the Southern Front was left without attention. It guarantees the king that the attack of the Southern Front, it will pass without any difficulties. The kingdom of Hector, once a powerful state comparable to the Kronos Empire. Due to its enormous military power, it grew at an unthinkable rate, but having suffered a severe defeat in the war with Valhalla, it sank to the very bottom. The prestige of the Hector kingdom has fallen to the level of Cairo. Currently, it has turned into one of the 6 kingdoms of the continent, and is forced to bend under the empire. Edwin went up to the king and asked him to let him speak, and the king told him to speak. With a smile on his face, he said that for the past 5 years, the kingdom of Hector has been experiencing an unprecedented crop failure in history. The young man with red hair still wearing armor is the prince of the kingdom of Hector. Edwin went on to say that the money borrowed from the gold bank to solve this problem has turned into huge interest rates, and is squeezing their throats. The kingdom doesn't have the strength to hold on any longer if this goes on. Hector would lose the meaning of being called a kingdom, and the king clutched his head and said that he understood it too, and then wondered if his ancestors had known what the outcome of a war would be. Edwin went on to tell the king that after losing the war, the kingdom of Hector distanced itself from further wars and from this story, so as not to make the same mistakes again. The king held his head and genuinely didn't want to accept his son's words, but Edwin went on to say that things were different now. Over the past year, they hadn't prepared enough. For the sake of the desperate people, for the sake of their royal people, they must make a decision. The king reflected that war, a word he dared not utter aloud, even though Edwin was his son, was nothing like the weakling he had been at his age. The king asked Edwin if he was sure, and Edwin said he didn't have anything, he wouldn't have brought it up at all. The king sighed and said that well then, from now on, all power in the war is transferred to the only prince of the kingdom of Hector, Edwin. Hector, Edwin bowed. Then he said calmly that he was listening and obeying. At the same time, we are being transferred to the South Barracks, where the 3-week training session has come to an end. Dale glowed with happiness, and then said that today he was assigning Roman to the reserve squad on the 5th line of defense. Dale coughed, covered his mouth with his hand, and then asked Roman what he might know. But everyone is literally singing about how they want to get there. I had to pull a little strings for him. Roman replied, thank you. Dale replied that no matter how grateful they were, Roman could always contact him if he needed anything. We are taken to McBurney, who hangs his head sadly and says that he is grateful for their time. McBurney was standing in front of Roman and his squad, and I'll go on to say that it was thanks to him that he realized what he was working for and that he would be able to train new cadets more diligently in the future. Roman said it was nothing, then handed McBurney a folded piece of paper and said he might need it. McBurney has collected all the information about the Southern Front and the local landscape, which will be useful in case war breaks out, although, of course, Roman will have to spend 2 peaceful years. McBurney said that he still wished Roman to be discharged in one piece, and Roman smiled and said, thank you. McBurney reflected that if it had been up to him, he would have followed Roman. McBurney glanced at the happy Roman, and then reflected that in those 3 weeks of watching Dimitri's novel, he had realized that the novel deserved to be dedicated to him. But Mr. Roman has already gathered around him outstanding talents. Hardly among them there is a place for Bezrukov cripples, who cannot even breathe a sword. True, he would only be a hindrance to the novel. McBurney smiled, tilted his head and said that then. And then he turned around and walked towards the Southern Barracks. Roman, looking at the map of the landscape, wondered what he had heard, and Lucas had to work hard to collect it. McBurney deserves respect, if only for his genuine good nature. We are being moved to the right defensive line of the Southern Front. One of the soldiers looks fearfully at his comrade and says enemy. And then he shouts, looking at the countless warriors under the wall, that the enemy is advancing. We are taken to Henry, who remembered Bale's words that when he was assigned in a special order to the same reserve unit as Roman on the 5th line of defense. Let him remember. During these 2 years, he must win Roman's friendship in any way possible. We are being transferred to the 5th line of defense, the reserve army camp, where Henry is marching with a small detachment. He walks into camp following Roman and wonders why he should get close to him. But still, it's a good thing he's on the 5th line of defense. Suddenly, something hits Henry. Shouts of alarm can be heard everywhere. The kingdom of Hector has declared war. Everyone prepare for battle. Henry is startled to wonder what the war fight is, what the hell it is, what the hell it means. Here he looks in the direction where the novel was standing, and then thinks that the novel has really disappeared. After the Hector kingdom declared war, the 1st line of defense was hit. But the ones who were most threatened with defeat were the 5th line of defense army. Someone shouted that the fortress gate was breached. They urgently need to block the way. The soldiers shouted and tried to stop Hector's army from entering, desperately defending the camp. Other soldiers stationed on the ramparts were trying to knock down Hector's troops who were climbing the stairs. Someone was shouting, "Stop them, please." Before us appears a middle-aged man with thick hair on his head and armor. He looks forward in fear. This is the commander of the 5th line of defense, Baron Bruce. He whispers that everything is over here. The 5th line of defense, dubbed the Paradise of the Southern Front, this place had long since lost the appearance of a front line. The aristocrats who arrived at the service were not forced to perform military duty, and a fairly comfortable life was waiting for them. And all because the responsibility for this lay with the man who gladly accepted their requests and bribes, filling his own stomach. This man was rotten into the core. Baron Bruce. Bruce was startled to think that it would be suicide to defend the 5th line of defense to the end. From the battlements, he shouted at the top of his voice that the soldiers should hold their line to the last. If they broke through, the innocent people would be threatened. The wars rushed into battle, and Bruce shouted at them not to back down. The soldiers looked at the commander puzzled and asked where he was going. The commander ran from the fortress wall in fright. He turned to the soldier and shouted for them to stall for time. He was going to report this directly to the king. Roman shouted loudly that the entire detachment should immediately move to the 5th line of defense, and the soldiers shouted in unison to eat. The soldiers together with Roman rushed to the 5th line of defense despite the fact that the Southern Front as a whole has a low defense capability. Among all the defense lines, it is on the 5th that the oldest equipment is used, one rabble among the soldiers, and, on top of everything else, a useless commander. In other words, it has the worst combat power. Just think of putting a reserve force in case of an emergency, 2 hours walk from the defense line. Roman held up a hand and ordered all the soldiers to stop, then reflected that they had at least an hour to get to the defense line. Bruce was running in front of him, waving affably and shouting that it was a reserve squad. And then running up to Roman said that they would let go of the formality. He asked Roman that he was the commander of these soldiers, and then said that first, let him protect him and take him to the rear. Now the front line is not reinforcements for the fifth line, but the security of its commander. You need to inform the royal family about the danger. Roman, looking at Bruce, wondered what it meant. This is Baron Bruce, commander of the fifth line of defense. Roman asked what he was doing here alone without soldiers. Bruce shouted that just look at this impudent guy and poked his finger at Roman. If Roman is from the reserve army, then at most he belongs to the junior aristocracy, and still dares to poke him. Roman angrily replied that he didn't see the point in listening to Bruce any further. He suddenly grabbed him by the throat. Then he squeezed him and told him that Bruce was here, which meant only one thing. Roman glared at Bruce and added, the so-called commander abandoned his soldiers and ran away. According to military regulations, a deserter, regardless of the title, can be executed on the spot. Whether Bruce understands what this means, Bruce fearfully asked if the novel will become. Roman cut off Bruce's head in just a second and replied that if Bruce had retreated with the army, at least he wouldn't have died at Roman's hands. Roman commanded forward, and Bruce's head remained on the ground without breathing. We are taken to the fifth line of defense. Huge piles of corpses lie everywhere. Soldiers wonder what the hell. He knew that one day this day would come. A huge number of Hector's warriors surrounded him, but he was fighting so hard that to think the commander had run away, abandoning his soldiers. Suddenly, the soldier was shot in the stomach, blood spurting out in all directions. I coughed up some blood. He couldn't stand on his feet anymore and fell to his knees. Hector's soldiers leaped at the exhausted, wounded soldier like animals, and the soldier thought that this was the end of him. But all of a sudden, Hector's soldiers who were swinging at the soldier were cut into pieces. Their corpses lay on the ground, without legs or arms, with their mouths open. Roman asked the puzzled soldier that he was Stephen. And then Roman said that Baron Bruce is dead. From now on, Romana is responsible for the defense line. Roman, looking at the startled Stephen, wondered if his name was on the list that Lucas had given him. Roman remembered Lucas saying that the only person of value on the fifth line of defense was Stephen. Roman sternly said that he would trust Stephen's many years of experience serving on the fifth line of defense. Let him answer if there was a way to protect this place. If Stephen says that there is no hope, then he, Roman Dmitri, as responsible for the reserve army, will order all the soldiers to retreat. The wounded Stephen thought that this person is Roman Dmitri. Stephen replied that he would be honest. Their military situation was already very bad. It would be the right decision to retreat, but then they would give the enemy an advantageous position. If the kingdom of Hector occupied one of the 5 lines of defense, they would have a route to deliver food, in which case the war would drag on for a long time. Roman, looking at the wounded Stephen, thought that then there was only one way. And then Stephen said that we should use an iron fence to prevent the enemy from passing through the fortress gate. Roman turned his head to the left and said that from now on, he would buy time to set it up. And now Stephen should gather the soldiers and prepare the fence. Stephen thought with a pang that it would be so easy to agree to such a foolhardy plan. Stephen shouted to Roman that it was very dangerous. Even now the enemy continues to stay on the territory of the fortress. If they isolate it, they will not be able to guarantee that they will not be able to leave. One of Hector's warriors was flying at Roman from behind, and Roman told Stephen that he understood his concerns. Stephen looked fearfully at the approaching threat in Roman's direction. Roman calmly took a step to the right, and Hector's warrior missed, and then Roman continued to say that he was not a fool who was ready to give up his life, obviously considering the plan impossible. Roman easily sliced Hector's warrior in half along the torso, blood spurting everywhere. Looking at this, Stephen wondered if Roman had done it without even seeing the attack. Chris was running towards Roman with a small squad. Roman, looking at him, said that from now on they would ram the way to the fortress gates. The whole army let them follow him. The troops saluted and shouted that they were obeying. Looking at Roman's warriors, Stephen wondered if there wasn't a shred of apprehension in them as to whether such a strong relationship between master and subordinate was possible. Roman told Stephen to get ready. Wounded Stephen, on his knees, said that there is. Looking at the situation, Stephen said that the war was beginning. And then he wondered what he understood now. The loyalty of Roman's warriors. It comes from respect. Roman and his army rushed into battle. Blood splatters everywhere. Should he put himself in danger for the sake of this country without having any love for it? After all, war is a game where the weak have no choice but to sacrifice themselves. Now that the kingdom of Cairo has recognized its value, he received special privileges and powers, ran forward and destroyed each of the enemies. by cutting them in half with your ball. He does this without a moment's hesitation. Speaking of which, there are many ways to avoid war. A few shells are fired at him, and he notices it. And they continue to think to themselves that the difficult circumstances of a really small state, and such bad realities, on the contrary, only made the blood boil in the veins. After that, Roman cuts the arrows that were sent to him, and he says that he is right. Miss the war for life. Then he smiles with all his joy. His companions say that they follow their master and run all together to the enemies. Chris uses magic and cuts one of the enemies. Kevin also viciously kills one of the soldiers by stabbing him with a sword. After all, every step of the novel on the indispensable led to death. After that, one of the people blocks with his shield with a sword strike. Roman killed 10 people by hitting your enemy from above with your weapon directly on the head and cutting it open. The soldiers rushed into battle, trusting each other, and when he killed 20, cutting one of the soldiers in half, did the soldiers realize that the enemy was stronger than they expected. And Roman is standing on a pile of corpses, blood dripping from his sword. After that, Roman stands over the sea of corpses and looks one of his eyes with a serious face. It glows purple. He says that when the number of brutal murders passed 50, the forests of enemy soldiers twisted in horror. After that, one of the knights standing at the wall says that he is a monster and is very scared. Looks at him, another soldier is also very scared and tries to turn away. Everyone thinks about running and retreating, after which a lot of soldiers turn around. And they leave in terror, gathering all their troops back behind the wall. Then one of the men is standing on top of him thinking, what the hell is going on? It was the warlord Hector Baron MacCleary. He thinks to himself that until recently the enemy rammed the fortress gates and were confident of their victory, but at some point their forces began to push back. He stands there in horror and then thinks for a moment and looks at the man who cuts through many soldiers without taking any damage at the same time. And he thinks to himself, what is he? And then Roman sees him and looks at him, and he is horrified and surprised. He thinks he's caught his eye from such a distance, and how is that possible? Roman runs forward at the knight and who are lined up in front of him, not thinking about anything. The warlord stands there, very much afraid, and thinks to himself that he is really going to kill him alone. And what arrogance is this? He points at it and yells at everyone to kill the boy before he gets stronger and gets angry. With an obvious fear on his face, he says that there is only one enemy and you need to stop him, after which all the knights attack the novels holding a shield and sword in their hands. But Roman runs at them without any fear. He looks at the warlord and thinks to himself that he is too careless. Then use the ability to jump directly into the thick of enemies. This is a lightning war strategy, isn't it? And he was able to learn it after going through countless battles. And as soon as the head of the enemy commander flies to hide, the enemy's formation will immediately begin to disintegrate, flying through the knights and ripping their heads off with your weapon. And at all costs, he must kill the warlord, after which he runs on with a serious face. Knights with auras jump on him and tell him that everyone is out of the way, and they will be able to deal with it. And Roman, and standing, noticing them, gets into a position, stopping. Roman uses mana and concentrates it in his sword. It was a 2 formation. He cuts through many knights with his lightning strike. There's still smoke from the impact and decomposed earth everywhere. Roman made a crater with his punch. On the other side of the crater are the knights. Some of them have already fallen, and they are shocked by what is happening. Does Roman watch them for a while? The knights fall from their dreams, start to tremble, and are very much afraid of all this. Even the warlord stands open-mouthed in shock. After which, he goes ahead and says that he is Hector's hero, drawing his sword and standing right in front of Roman. And he handpicked it after that. His head falls off his shoulders and Roman holds her in his arms, lifting her forward. He shouts to everyone that the war of the kingdom of Kyra is listening to him, holding the warlord's head in his hand, showing that he's dead. He is dripping with blood, and he says that if they spare the remaining ones now, they will certainly be angry to come back again, so even if they have to shed their blood, they must put their lives on the line and punish them. On the rock shows everything to the knights. The full knight is shocked, thinking about how this could have happened. He looks beyond it all and even higher, and says that now he understands why his uncle ordered to get closer to Roman by any means. Chris stands with his hands clasped behind his back and reports back. He says that, having lost their commander, Hector's soldiers scattered, and thanks to the courage of Roman and the soldiers, the defense line was protected. And 30 people, besides Chris, are not dead. All his armor was covered in blood, and telling all this to his knights, who were also wounded and battered, says that it was all a great job. Roman comes and tells them to use elixirs to heal their wounds, and they agree to this. After that, one of the men is very surprised that he supplied all the soldiers with elixirs. Remembering that the elixir, an abnegated potion developed in the magic tower, is blood-colored and in large round vials, and it is known for its unconditional price even for the lowest rank. After all, if you pour this potion on the wound, it will completely restore it. And the overwhelming power of reckless decisions and the generous attitude towards soldiers. Despite all this, it is how Roman cares about his subjects who are being treated, creating trust between Roman and the soldiers, not just formally. But if such a person says to jump into a fire pit, everyone will believe and obey. After that, Roman calls Stephen to him. He tells him to clean up the battlefields and prepare for the second wave of attacks. And he shouts that he needs a soldier who is well versed in the topography of the southern front. After which, Stephen is very surprised by this and says that they are really going to leave immediately. And Roman looks at him and says that's right, the war isn't over yet. After that, in one of the buildings, someone says that he is a local here, she needs to use him as a guide. He shows signs of respect and says that his name is Kobai. He has brown hair, brown eyes, and one tooth is missing. And he also has a white headband. He tells me what this map is for the southern front, and what is the shortest route to the rear. They point to a card placed on the table and say what about this and how much do they know. This journey will take 2.5 hours. They need the shortest path, which will take no more than 2 hours. Roman says, then points it out with his hands, and Kobe says that then he abruptly realizes that he understood. He thinks about it and, looking at the novels, says that how did he know that the mountain path would take 2.5 hours? He was very surprised and thinks that this is not just a suggestion, and he has to some extent studied the topography of the southern front. And with his surprise, he asks if he didn't know that he was so familiar with the area. Speaking of which, then, why did he choose him as a guide? And Roman says that when he received the assignment, most likely, he decided that he was not familiar with the southern front at all. To which he replies that he is not at all, and Roman says that there is no need to be so embarrassed. This is a common occurrence. He had learned the basics in case of an emergency, but he didn't understand everything. Thoroughly speaking, this is with complete seriousness. So when he looks at Kobe, he says that he needed his help as a local. He, in turn, was very surprised by this and thinks to himself that he is different from the aristocrats who came to the southern front for the carefree army life. And with his help, the southern front will have hope. After that, Roman goes outside and meets Chris. He says that only 10 minutes of the meeting did not take much time. Chris says that he and 30 people finished their training standing in front of Roman. But he, in turn, turns around and is surprised. He turns around and says what is he doing here? After which the pink-haired man Henry Albert stands very surprised and confused. Roman repeats, saying that he asked what he was doing here, saying this with complete seriousness and a haughty look. After which, Henry sighs and thinks to himself that if he says that for the sake of getting closer, he will immediately send him away. After which, he says that first of all, he apologizes for his past mistakes. He bows and says that it sounds unconscionable, but he would like to follow him and help. And as an aristocrat of the Kingdom of Cairo, he couldn't stay away and just give orders. After which, Roman is surprised and angrily tells him that whether to follow him or not is up to him, but he must clarify one thing. If he suddenly wants to interfere with his plan a little, he will not hesitate to abandon it. Then Henry was very surprised, very frightened. Roman and his guard escape into the forest. They follow the topographer of that region. Henry tries to catch up with them, saying that it's too fast and very much blush. After that, they are surprised to hear some groans and stop. The surveyor is surprised. They say that this is a soldier from the southern barracks. Looking at the half-dead soldier lying on the floor, bleeding profusely. They put him in a tree and tell him what happened, to which he replies that the southern barracks was attacked, and he asks them for help, after which he begs for their help and dies. The man looks at his corpse and thinks to himself that this is not the front line, but the southern barracks in the rear. He recalls that it is all on fire, and says that, apparently, the soldiers escaped, having managed to get to this place, and there is a high probability that the attack occurred half an hour ago at the most. And it turns out that the kingdom of Hector attacked 5 defensive lines. I represent all this on the map. But at the same time, it used the rapid reaction army. After that, he is surprised and realizes that he understood something, saying that really, he's talking about getting to the south barracks first. A man with a bloody fist is holding a bloody sword while trembling, gripping it tightly. For the soldiers nearby, they smile and look at this kid who pointed a sword at them. They say what I listen to most is to leave it, because it will die without it. And the other guy with the hair says that maybe he will already give up, and then they will kill him painlessly. That the man was yelling at them to go to hell, looking at them all wounded and torn clothes. He's got a lot of cuts and scars, and he's standing there looking scared, but he's still holding the sword. He shouts that he thinks one of them will die, and even if he has to sacrifice his life, he will take one of them with him and let them risk an attack. And then he thinks to himself, looking at how badly he's hurt, that it's a curse if only his right hand was still there, showing that it's been cut off. He thinks it's interesting to see what happens to Mr. Roman, gritting his teeth. The only one on the southern front who didn't let his guard down for a second, remembering what he looked like, even though he heard that he was assigned to the 5th line of defense. Remembering the way Roman looked at his charges, talking about what he thinks about what he will do, continuing to hold the sword, and it is clear that he is very tired. He thinks he's on the verge of death. He thinks about Mr. Roman, and it says that he still can't leave the battlefield. Looking at how a gap appears at the wall, behind which there are 2 soldiers. After that, an explosion occurs and many fragments fly off in all directions. These soldiers were startled, turning to the wall and wondering what had happened and how they had sent in the troops for cover. After which, someone stood on a rock, towering over these soldiers. They shout to Tom that who is he and is this really help, looking at him. And he says how did he know? Looking at what the novel looks like, that person. Mr. Roman, in turn, looks at the situation and thinks, is he really still alive? He swipes his sword and blood spills everywhere. He shouts that now we need to destroy the enemies and save the survivors, pointing the soldiers in the direction. They immediately rushed into battle, attacking all the enemies. After that, several soldiers want to attack the novels. While talking about it, they start running towards him with their weapons. After that, Roman says that they will take these people alive, for he cuts them off faster than they are with his blows on the neck and stomach. To do this, he used 2 of his fingers. He says that he put pressure on the points, even if they don't wake up. They won't be able to move for a while, even though they're lying down unconsciously. After that, one of the remaining ones tries to escape. They say that the devil. We need to lend it to the upper classes as soon as possible. After that, they grab him and say that at least one of them, but he definitely needs to be killed. It was the survivor of the wounded soldiers who was trapped in a chokehold. He tries to get out, but he can't. He tries to move his hand away, but starts to choke. After that, they both fall to the ground, 1 unconscious and 2 breathing heavily. Roman comes up to him and tells him that he did a good job looking at him, and that he should leave the rest to them, but for now he should rest. The latter, in turn, looks up at him. He closes his eyes and talks about that, thanks to him. After that, Chris stands in one of the exits of the building and reports to Roman that they have dealt with 12 soldiers of the kingdom of Hector and saved 5 survivors. And they also, according to the testimony that caused the Viscount, were wounded during the battle with Hector's soldiers, and he fled to the mountains. Roman looks at him and thinks to himself that the main forces of Hector's kingdom have attacked the southern barracks and moved somewhere further away, and the troop strength is at least several hundred soldiers. Then he asks Chris what about Hector's soldiers, and he tells him that everyone is locked in one of the buildings. And Roman wants to enter one of the buildings and says that from now on they must not let anyone inside until you allow it, and this is an order. Roman opens the door and thinks to himself that the kingdom of Hector must have been a reason to use deceptive tactics, and he needs to find out everything. Opening the door completely with a serious face, he costs about 3 soldiers that he disabled with 2 fingers and says that starting from now, he will give 3 minutes. He approaches the one in the middle and says that if he answers his question correctly, he will kill painlessly, but otherwise, they will suffer terrible torment until the very last moments of your life. And the bound soldiers smile and start shouting that you need to kill them, and letting it do it, because it will just kill, to which Roman asks one question. What is the purpose of the Hector kingdom? Looking down on them. And the soldier smiles and tells him to go to hell. And Roman asks the question, what are they doing in the South Barracks? Then he tells him to just kill him. Roman says that 3 minutes are up and puts 2 fingers to the shoulder of one of the soldiers. After which, he starts to scream for more and Seva's mouth starts to bleed. He says this is called the method of separating tissues and squeezing out bones by pointing at his 2 fingers. He goes on to say that they will feel the pain of twisting muscle and bones all over their bodies and meet a very slow, painful death. And he is sure that they should have been prepared for torture on such a thing they are experiencing for the first time. After that, the remaining soldiers look at it with horror, watching as he suffers, bleeds. He tells him that he thinks it will make a difference, and even if he hears from him the kingdom's plans, it's too late for Hector to stop them. And Roman comes up to him, smiling and telling him that this is exactly what he was waiting for, and he is surprised by this, asking the question, how is it? Roman stands over him, looking down on him and says that he didn't expect to hear the truth from them until the very beginning, and he just wanted to see how they would react. And it looks like he was right. After all, their true target is in the rear. After that, the soldiers are very surprised by this, looking at him, and fear appears on him. Roman puts his finger to his face and tells him to die. After that, he uses magic and a painful death occurs. He walks out of the building and thinks to himself that the simultaneous attack on several points of the southern front was just a distraction, and if their plan turns out to be successful, we can assume that the southern front has already fallen. Heading forward, a soldier with red hair and gray eyes looks ahead with a smile. Roman stands in the hospital room, next to the man he saved, and asks him what happened to the South Barracks. He should tell you more, to which he rises and says that it is good. He sighs and says that 2 hours ago he was attacked by soldiers, the kingdom of Hector. He begins to talk and recalls how they were attacked by soldiers while they were preparing for horse riding training as usual. And they suddenly appeared. The soldiers of the kingdom of Gictara attacked them. They quickly gathered the warriors and fought back, but due to too much difference in strength, they were simply slaughtered. And he remembers the Viscount commander of their barracks, and he doesn't know if he's still alive. Where did this man give orders to the soldiers to go forward? Roman, looking at him, asks if there was something special about the enemy's appearance, to which he reflects and says that they were lightly armed. The face of the man who appeared to be the commander was covered with scars. After which, Roman moved his hands together and pondered, starting to think to himself that his face was littered with scars. They were also lightly armed. Then Roman says it must be a ranger squad. He is immediately surprised and wonders, how is the Hector Kingdom Ranger Squad? He has heard that the head of this squad remembers what they look like, and he is covered with a scar in salmon. He has a scar on his eye due to which it is permanently closed. They value the scars on their faces from countless battles as much as they value the order and medals. And he tells Roman that they understand why they were interpreting the southern barracks. Very surprised, he tells him that if they have gained a favorable high ground, wouldn't it be better to use this advantage and defeat the front line? To which Roman says that they aim not at the front, but at the rear, showing how they are. People are walking through the front line, and so they attack the southern barracks. He says that since the southern barracks is located on the way to the rear, they will have no choice but to attack it. To which this knight is very surprised and says that they want to say this, because now the kingdom of Hector is using a deceptive maneuver. Roman goes on to say, looking at him, that the attack line of defense was just for a diversion. Their true target is located in the rear, because that's where the teleportation gate is located. Saying this with a serious face, after which the soldier is very surprised by this and gets shocked. They remember that the teleportation gate is a kind of gate with a huge amount of magic. After all, this is a magical solution to the compression of space, and since the gate allows you to cover a huge distance at a time, showing how they are connected between each other. Capturing them during the battle was an important strategic move, and as a result, the enemy will not only be left without reinforcements, but will also pave the way for a counteroffensive. If you set new coordinates for conquered enemies, remembering how teleport ports can be set coordinates, and direct teleportation. And for this reason, in case of a counterattack, the most explosive device is installed in the teleport gate. Roman says that in this war, it is not the kingdom of Hector that is filled with firm confidence in its decisions about a win-win strategy that will surely lead to victory if successfully implemented. And this strategy is to conquer the teleportation gate. And the soldier says that then they should immediately go to help the rear, with fear and excitement at the same time. And Roman says no, he is very surprised by this, and he says that he only received a request for help from the rear. And he grabs his blanket and says that did the Hector Kingdom Ranger Squad leave the South Barracks an hour and a half ago? Show it on the map as they go straight from here to the teleportation gate. By now, they should have already been conquered, because the enemy is on the defensive line, remembering how they attack very quickly, and the fact that the soldiers are in their rear, remembering how those would attack them. The troops would defend and the entire fighting force of the southern front, including them, would be completely isolated. And Roman tells him that from now on, they will have to survive on their own, without help from the kingdom. There's a huge crater in the floor, state border of the kingdom of Hector. A man is kneeling near the teleportation gate, and reports to the red-nosed man that he has received a message that the soldiers have crossed the southern barracks and are now coming to the rear positions, and they are repelling attacks on the defense lines of the kingdom of Cairo. He says that they completely failed to figure out their strategy. Then he touched the man, saying that it's too early to relax. Speaking of attacking the defense of Cairo, in places where the enemy is not going to give up, time will inevitably be delayed. And he goes on to say that their goal is not to destroy the fortress wall right outside of our eyes. If the strategy succeeds, I can imagine him putting his hand on that wall. They will naturally be able to get their hands on the southern front. And he thinks to himself that the key to the success of the strategy is security. He will look at this soldier with a confident eye and think that for about a year they have been studying the structure of the southern front border and have introduced a squad of Jackson's Rangers into it. If they had started from the beginning, put all their strength into attacking, they would have been able to crush everyone in just 4 numbers. At the moment, the most important thing for them is the existence of lying teleportation while standing near one of them. He says that in cases of the worst outcome, he should be prepared to destroy the goalie by teleporting. And if the plan fails, they will destroy the gate. Teleportations will switch to plan 2. Saying this in all seriousness, the soldier looks up at him and thinks it's terribly rational reasoning. And he thinks that it's not for nothing that they call him the star of Hector's kingdom, Edwin Hector, and he reasons that his existence will once again revive Hector's kingdom. After that, one of the knights is killed and a lot of blood flies out. Bacon thinks to himself that this is where the battle begins, eventually killing this knight and standing near the teleport. After all, until the enemy revealed the plan. He tells the Rangers to hurry up, and he says that we need to successfully establish communication. A year ago, Edwin sits at the table next to the Viscount and tells him that the Hector kingdom doesn't have the strength to hold on any longer, and the further they go, the more the gold bank's interest is weighing on them. He says that if they suffer another crop failure next year, the state treasury will lose its last saving. So he wants to make him an offer. Tells him that how he looks at trying to conquer the southern front of the Cairo kingdom together with me, holding out her hand to him and sitting next to him. After that, he is surprised by this, and it is said that Hector let the chair go, that a prolonged crop failure is a god's curse, and in situations where the country could collapse at any moment. This young man, dubbed the greatest genius in the history of the kingdom, became a hero, like a judge, born in a time of troubles, holding out his hand and smiling. So, during the year, the kingdom of Hector 48 times penetrated the territory of the southern front. Using spies, they dug a tunnel to the rear, and the Rangers secretly entered through the finished tunnel, walking through it and showing that you need to be quiet. And they were able to get their hands on the teleportation gate, sitting next to it, and then the head is informed that the connection was successfully established. The bro starts working, and he greets Edwin Hector. Then Edwin comes out of the portal, and all the Rangers bow to him. He calls out to one of the knights, who says it's him. And he says that he is assigning him the 1st Division, and he must deal with the remnants of the defeated army in the rear, and solidly reinforce the defenses in case the kingdom of Cairo sends reinforcements. Then he says that he listens and obeys, and leaves. He calls out to Jackson, who kneels in front of him and tells him to give orders. Then the connection with the Baron in charge of the 5th line of defense was lost, and does he know anything about it? To which he says that so far they have found out what happened. But this is the 5th line of defense. There is no reason to worry. It is known as the most problematic one on the entire southern front, remembering how the Baron stands on it, and it was decided that a small squad would be enough to crush it. At which Edwin gets angry and says that I remember him saying that you shouldn't attack recklessly, no matter what the situation is. And isn't that right? And he says that everything is so. And when the plan is completed, the Baron will receive a separate punishment regardless of achievements, clenching his hand tightly into a fist. After that, there are thoughts that Edwin Hector did not notice that, despite the detailed plan worked out, remembering how the novel appeared in it. After all, 2 variables were formed anyway. And this is the 1st line of defense. The soldiers are shouting that they need to repair the fortress wall soon, and before the enemies attack again. A lot of soldiers come inside and all covered in blood, like the whole wall, and the soldiers are very wounded. Then the man runs and calls the commander. He says he got a message from the South Barracks, to which he is surprised, turns around and wonders why from the South Barracks. It was a man with long green hair and a mustache, commander of the 1st line of defense, Count Donald. He comes to the room where Roman projects himself and tells him that he is Roman Dimitri, from the Reserve Army 5 line of defense, and he asks him what made him contact him in the current situation. Roman says that he will go straight to the point and says that it looks like Hector's kingdom used a deceptive maneuver and captured the teleportation gate located in the rear. Before the kingdom of Hector surrounds them on all sides, they must abandon their strongholds and take refuge in the mountains. And this is in order to all the remaining forces of the south to gather there. To which Donald is very indignant at this and thinks to himself that the mountainous landscape of the south is so confusing, and he says this just as an advice. Roman says that you need to use strategies, and Donald says they'll sort it out on their own, and that's it, waving their hand. After that, he thinks that he just blacked out and once so, and everything worked out. He will throw the remaining lines of defense, except for the 5th line. Roman leaves. Does he stand in front of his soldiers? Don't tell them to pack their bags, because right now they're heading to the mountains with a serious face. This means that the database is not being contacted. I was standing near the message crystal. Whereupon Donald bites his fingers and thinks to himself, what's the curse? Or Roman's words really true? And he thinks that even if the lands closest to the southern front promise to send reinforcements, it will take them at least half a month to get here. And while the other soldier insists on this stone, the other soldier thinks to himself, is there really no way? He thinks not. Still, if the fortress could hold out until reinforcements arrive, then they would have a chance to win. Making a startled face. 4 hours later, their line of defense is surrounded from 2 sides, and he thinks to himself how this is possible, since they are completely isolated. He sits up on the wall, covering himself, and thinks to himself that, damn it, they've stopped their teleportation gate and added to the military power, and that the first line of defense is also blocked from all sides by Hector's soldiers. He examines the walls, the furnishings, and says that this way they will not be able to completely patch up the fortress walls, showing how they are knights setting up a ballista, thinking that they have obtained materials for the defense of the fortress. Having lined up all the knights in a row, and not to repeat the mistakes made in one battle, they can hold out, for he says that everyone should prepare to attack. He stands on top of the wall and will order the knights of the first line of defense to listen to him, because the kingdom of Hector won, their teleportation gate is not surrounded from all sides. And you can't expect a pod underfoot from the kingdom to arrive this very minute. Shouting this to his knights. And he goes on to say that, however, as in battle 1, they should trust him to count. And they will definitely survive. And then the knights, listening to his speech, heard something and asked, what is this sound? Turning to others. The count turns around and asks what the hell is going on, and the knight standing next to him starts to worry and tremble. They say there's a flash, showing how the soldiers brought the flash here, a huge structure that uses magic power. They started using it, and a huge golden-colored magic circle appeared on it. He charged a huge fireball and released it directly at them. After that, the wall exploded, and many people were burned alive. The count, who was looking on in shock, fell to the ground. After all, before Hector's kingdom surrounded them from all sides, they must abandon the fortresses, take refuge in the mountains. And this is in order to all the remaining forces of the south to gather as well. After that, he realizes that Roman was still right. I understand how terrible the situation is. And look at the way the knight cuts it. After that, one of the soldiers raises the commander's head and shouts that he has it. Thanks to the fact that they suppressed the main line with the help of a flash, the fortress was taken without heavy losses. And if this goes on, they won't be able to capture the entire southern front very soon. After which Ito walks up to the rangers. Ito kneels in front of him, and he says that time is on their side, looking into the distance. After that, the soldiers accompany many prisoners. They tie them together with a rope and say that they need to arrest all the surrendering soldiers and ban them in one place, so that no new surprises arise. They will need a lot of weapons to use to negotiate with the kingdom of Cairo. Then, depending on the situation, use debtors as a reason for the transaction. And the head of the rangers says he got it. Edwin thinks to himself that the plan is perfect, but where did this anxiety come from? He squints his eyes and looks into the distance, thinking what the hell, why is he missing something? After that, one of the soldiers runs up to him, shouting that it's very bad. It counts down that the Baron was handed over to die on the battlefield. Because of this, the connection with him was severed. After that, Edwin is surprised by this and angry, says who gave this information, and he should come here quickly. And then the tired and broken fighter says that he is sure that at first the fifth line of defense looked as if it was completely unprepared for war. Talking about this topic while sitting on the floor. He says that as soon as the battle began, they successfully rammed the gate, and the Baron ordered the fortress to be destroyed. Edwin listens to him standing in front of him, and he is sitting on a cot with the other knights lying next to him. And he says that's when that monster showed up, too, clutching its head and draining its panic. Edwin is surprised and asks what kind of monster is this. And the knight says that his power was so great that he could not even believe his eyes, remembering how Roman went to these knights alone. And this monster single-handedly took down many of his companions. As soon as he blinked, dozens of soldiers immediately fell from his blade, remembering how she'd smashed Roman with her punches. And even the Aura swordsman fell from a single blow, remembering how he used mana to kill them. And they lost their lives in the blink of an eye. And the mere presence of this bridge transformed the entire battle. After that, the panic in this soldier begins to grow more and more. He starts sweating and clutches his head. He calls him a monster. She shivers and starts repeating that he's a monster, and Edwin listens to him and tells him what a monster means. He turns and walks away, and Edwin continues to panic and repeats that he's a monster, and Edwin was thinking that, come to think of it, he heard that the youngest ranker in Cairo was assigned to the southern front. Because of this year, he has not seen perfect preparation, after which he is very angry and thinks that an unexpected variable has appeared, Dimitri. Edwards goes to one of the rooms and tells Jackson to report on the situation, and he goes like this, and he says that they checked the fifth line of defense and found a soldier Cairo. It's not like they escaped to the mountains, after which Edwin sits on the throne. If he ordered it, he would immediately form a squad to give chase. This one says no, this situation has already deviated. If you haven't captured the southern front, pointing fingers, then it's time to start negotiations with the Kingdom of Cairo. After that, the events are transferred to the royal castle of Cairo. This is a huge palace, dotted with lanterns and all sorts of decoration. And the red carpet is located along the entire length of the road to the gate. The man with the crown sits at the table and asks when they will arrive. And the butlers are very worried and get lost with a handkerchief and ask for forgiveness, because anyway, this is very sudden news, and everyone will need a little. He bangs his fist on the table, very angry, and it turns out to be the King of Cairo, Daniel Cairo. The King of Cairo cannot make a decision alone, remembering that he is bound in chains with many people, and he could only move troops with the consent of the aristocrat. Sitting at the table and eating food, there is a butler with a powerful power standing nearby. And then he listens to the sounds of conversation coming from the door. Being a male member of the Marquis Benedict aristocrat faction, he says that he was a little late on the way here because his carriage broke down, and comes in smiling. This man looks quite old and has a gray beard and hair, but he is dressed in an intelligent suit. And then two other men enter, one in a red raincoat and orange hair, smiling and closing his eyes, and another man with brown hair and a brown jacket. It was the Earl of Denver, Valhalla's confidant. Valhalla's confidant, Count Gregory. And then Gregory says that, by the way, it's true that Hector's kingdom attacked the southern front. After that, they all sit down at the table and prepare for the meal. The king says that the Hector kingdom crossed the state border, unexpectedly attacked the defensive fortress, sighing heavily. If this goes on, the southern front will be in great danger. After which Benedict says that then it's enough to send the soldiers right away. Isn't that the case when looking at the king? The king looks at him and thinks to himself that he is impudent, and says that then consider that this agreement with every minute will send troops to the southern front. After that, Benedict reports that the teleportation gate has been captured, and he is very surprised by this. After all, ultimately the board system is divided into 4 factions, representing how the table is divided into different 4 factions. And this only worsened the problems. After that, the king shouts and bangs on the table, saying that how they plan to fix this situation. If they had given in and allowed even the king to make a single decision, there was no way the southern front would have been in such danger. He continues to shout and points his finger at them, saying that what happened is entirely on their conscience. To which a knight from Wounded Armor comes in and says that the king of the kingdom, Hector, contacted them via a magic transmission. After that, the king and all his entourage stand in the messenger. They've been contacted by Edwin, and he says they're demanding payback for the war. It does not require estimating the cost of the southern front and reimbursing it in gold. After that, Benedict is very surprised by this and shouts to him that he thinks that he has the right to declare such a thing by unleashing a war without a reason. A nearby man says that he is an impudent robber, after which Edwin says that he gives them only 3 days, and if they do not fulfill their requirements by then, the southern front will be added to the Ha holdings. It seems that they are stalling for time under the guise of consent. Then none of the hostages of the southern front will be able to return alive. After that, he passes out, sitting on the throne. After a prolonged crop failure drained the treasury of the kingdom of Hector, and also accumulated interest from the gold bank, remember what is happening in his homeland, as many people are starving and drought everywhere. Here he sits and thinks to himself that for the sake of the suffering people he is ready to become not a star Hector, and the most violent demon in history. After that, he gets very angry and says that this is all in order to save his people. The king sits on the throne. He says that from the moment the teleportation gate fell into the hands of the enemy, they were left with no choice. He clutches a rag in his hand and says that by fulfilling the compensation requested by Hector's kingdom, they will at least reduce their losses. After that, the king gets up from the table, and the others are still sitting, and Benedict says that if he does this, they will definitely throw away a huge amount of money. To which the king stands up and abruptly starts shouting that they have no choice, and if necessary, they need to look for another option. To which everyone just sits there in silence, gritting their teeth and closing their eyes and thinking. The king is even more angry, opening his mouth and thinking that this is even funny. After all, until recently, they were at each other's throats sharing power in this tiny country. After that, he sighs and thinks that when faced with a real threat, they immediately gave up. And he says it's settled then, they'll accept the kingdom's terms, Hector. To which one of the people sitting there says that he is against it. And he is very surprised by this. Everyone around starts looking at him. He says that the southern front has a novel Dmitri. Then he remembers what he looks like, and that he fought the war very well, and according to the report he just received, he won on the 5th line of defense. If only he could change the current state of the war, they would have a serious chance of winning. The king calms down and sits back down. He says that he recognizes that Roman Dmitri is an outstanding swordsman. He closes his eyes and says that a star swordsman who has barely reached adulthood is a blessing for the Cairo kingdom. However, there is no way he can influence the course of the war alone, imagining everything as all the wars turned on him alone. To which Benedict looks at the king and says that it is true. Roman Dmitri, the future kingdom of Cairo, and then use a dubious adventure, losing a talented person in a foreign land. It is better to minimize the losses first of all. To which Denver says that, as expected, they do not suspect the true power of the novel, looking at it, very surprised and worried. After all, he remembers how he received a message from his assistants, and he was able to get information only because he belongs to the faction close to him. Remembering how Romany looks and thinks that his skills and abilities are superior to the 3-star swords, and he is the only variable capable of smashing the enemy. Remembering how he read the report, and was very surprised by it. After which, he makes a small smile and closes his eyes, thinking that he doesn't need to share this information with others. And he says that if everyone thinks so, then he will not insist on it either. He points his fingers at 3, says they only have 3 days. He keeps smiling and saying that how about we wait for 3 days. If there are no changes during that time, then he will accept the Hector Kingdom's offer. Whereupon the king looks at everyone and says that they will do so, and from that moment on, the kingdom of Cairo will start preparing for 2 outcomes, a war with the kingdom of Hector and a truce. Henry looks very frightened at what is happening, says that my God. He looks at how the entire defense line is burning in constantly high ground, watching it. He thinks it's over. This is Cairo's utter defeat in the war. Startled, he turns to the soldiers and says that they are immediately retreating behind the mountains and think to themselves that he does not need a war hero. He shouts to the soldiers that they must move quickly, and they agree. They head forward. They turn into the mountains and start running. He runs first, and he thinks that first you need to survive, and then we'll see. Then something moves from behind the bushes, and one of the warriors attacks Henry directly. The man is surprised by this, and he grits his teeth and pulls out his sword. It was Chris, and he was leaning her sword against his neck and telling her to be quiet. He is surprised by this, realizes who it is, and is told to follow him. Chris then leads Henry's soldiers. Henry, watching Chris, wonders to himself what he's doing here and if they haven't gone to the rear. He passes through the bushes with an indignant look and thinks about why they didn't forget in the middle of the cursed mountain. He is very surprised and thinks to himself, what the hell? After that, he watches the base on the mountain from tents and stakes, and he tells everyone when they made that camp. Chris approaches him and tells him that the master thought that the base in the rear had already fallen, and this is his mysterious emergency camp. And Henry shouts to everyone in fright that if you fall down, you need to run. And why camp in this place? To which Chris is very angry. Green auras appear from his eyes, and he says that the war is not over yet, and they stayed here to protect allies like them. I will not defeat the enemies climbing the mountains, saying it all to Henry. And he says that if he were a man of the kingdom of Hectara, he would also lose his life. Glaring at Henry. Henry, in turn, is very scared of this, looking at Chris and thinking to himself that this is a monster and like a family. Dmitri managed to get hold of such monsters, after which he says, Chris, where is Mr. Roman now? And he hadn't seen it in a long time. Chris, looking at Henry, says that the master is now personally dealing with the enemies on the front line. To which Henry clenches his fist and begins to tremble, thinking to himself that Vodka, their commander Roman Dmitri, is a true monster. After that, several soldiers run after another soldier, but still get their punches on his back, and he begins to howl in pain. The other 2 soldiers also fight among themselves, dealing many blows. And the man with the pigtail and the green-haired black hair is the aide-de-camp of the front line of defense brand. He thinks to himself that at least those who remain should survive. He calls. After that, someone spears one of the knights, killing them, and blood splatters all over the battlefield. And he continues to think that because their commanding officer was saddened by the decision they made, the soldiers of the first line of defense are doomed to die. After that, one of the blows pushes him back, and he falls to the ground. The soldier, smiling and not swinging his sword, stood over Brand's body. And he thinks to himself that this is the end, and then something pierces that knight's neck, and his head falls off his shoulders. It was Roman who killed this soldier with a single blow. All the others noticing Roman say that the enemy has come and attack him, surrounding him, saying that he needs to be killed. After that, Roman carries out a series of blows, with which he cuts all the opponents into small pieces. Brand, watching it all on the floor, thinks this place is hell. Despite Roman's back, he asks who the hell he is as blood sprays everywhere. Roman turns around and says that this is the reserve unit of the 5th line of defense, Roman Dmitri. After that, the latter looks at him in surprise and thinks that the same Roman Dmitri who advised them to retreat, and he did not run away, but came to save them. After that, Bran gets to his feet and says that the first line of defense has already been broken, and the kingdom of Hector has moved towards the second line of defense, and it is expected that it will not last long. After that, Roman stood in front of him, says that he does not offer to give up, to which Bran begins to worry and says that Mr. Roman. He admits that he is a strong swordsman, but this war between the realms is impossible to face Hector's kingdom alone. After which, Roman thinks that the great famine, surprise attacks, war, and actions of the Hector kingdom don't fit his current situation. He closes his eyes and wonders what their intentions are. After which, he turns away from Bran and leaves, saying that Hector is going to capture the southern front in one blow, because the kingdom does not have the strength to fight a long war, and the Bran tells him what he wants to say. And Roman explains everything, showing everyone on the map that Hector's goal is to use the war and eliminate Chris in the country, and only by conquering the southern front, they will convince the Cairo royal authority to cooperate. I remember all the higher ranks of the kingdom of Cairo. Roman leaves and thinks that if this is the case, then he can raise the actions of Hector's kingdom, and they are now taking a risk and putting everything on the line, and the fate of the entire country. Then he smiles very hard. 2 line of defense of the southern front. Jenkins points out with his hand flashes that you need to shoot. After that, the flash, which has loaded its hull, shoots directly into the wall, destroying it. Everything starts to burn along with the knights. They make a huge hole in the wall. Because of all this, Edwin is watching. He stands on a high ground, from which you can see all his army. And we think to ourselves that the death of the Baron was not part of his plans. He continues to look at the attacks from the service and says to himself that the 5th line of defense is the weakest on the entire southern front. And Roman Dmitri, as he watches the knights fight each other around the fire on the wall, he thinks that the testimony of the defeated soldiers is true and that his power is beyond imagination. As he watches the battle, he keeps wondering if his strength will be enough to stand up against the entire army of the Hector kingdom. No, at least they'll have to suffer with him. It will not bring any fatal changes. Then he gets angry and thinks to himself that the kingdom of Hector is not so weak that just one person can knock the ground out from under them. Just then, Edwin notices that one of the knights is calling him. He shouts that Ben is in trouble. They have lost contact with the first company sent to deal with the remains of the enemy army. And the knights continue to worry and shout that this is not all, not 2 and not 3 company does not get in touch. Then he wonders to himself what the bad feeling that has been leaving him all this time. It was caused by Dimitri's novel. While the 3 soldiers kneel down and report to him, after which, they enter the tent and are surrounded by many knights. And he asks Jackson to report on the situation, and he listens to him. He gets down on one knee in front of him and says that immediately after the first line fell, the defense of the 3rd Battalion was ordered to deal with the remnants of the enemy army. About an hour ago, communication with companies belonging to the 3rd Battalion was cut off. And judging by the fact that communication with the 3rd Company was severed in turn, most likely they were killed. Tell all this, Edwin, to the man at the table. He asks with a serious face what the alleged victims might be, to which he is told that they are about 300 people. Edwin lowers his head and begins to think that his worries have turned into reality, and he is sure that this is the work of Roman Dmitri, and he did not run for the mountains at all, after which Edwin grits his teeth and bites his lip and speaks. At the front, choosing the path of resistance. He tells Jackson, what if we leave Roman Dmitri out now? It will create even more problems later. And he looks at him with excitement. He tells him, sitting on his knees, that Prince Roman Dmitriev is just a minor deviation, and if he goes along with him and is defeated in the assault, then they will not be able to guarantee the success of our plan. He goes on to say that now it is important not to run after the son of the Dmitriev family, but to defeat the remaining defensive fortresses. To which Edwin says no, it's not. He says very seriously that it's important to deal with Chris right now. He gets very angry and says that the one who started the plan is smart. Edwin tells Jackson that he must immediately withdraw the soldiers from the 2nd line. And he closes his eyes, agrees with him, but he is clearly dissatisfied with something. He thinks to himself, why is he so fixated on the novel Dmitri? After that, in the dead of night, the soldiers stand in line. It also says that, according to reports, he is hiding on this mountain. Edwin goes ahead and is told, by devoting an entire day to the last year of developing the plan, Edwin was able to sense instinctively that the novel has a dangerous element. Edwin passes by his commanding officers, and they are lined up in a row, and he says that he understands what they are thinking right now. However, as a military leader, he must always be prepared for the worst outcome, after which everyone looks at him. He says that not yet conquering Milo's remaining lines of defense is the least of evil, and the worst moment is the existence of Roman Dmitri recalls the way he looks. After all, it is not the prediction of change that has generated it. After which, Jackson, watching this video, thinks to himself that Edwin Hector's decisions always have an iron logic and you just have to trust him. After that, Edwin says that all the troops are ready to follow the orders of the commander, and they agree to this. He turns around, walking into the mountains, and says that now it's time to hunt Cairo's rats. 3 torches on a mountain range in the south of the country. Those who have thrown themselves thoughtlessly on a quest cannot miss the enemy. Therefore, it was decided to place the army at the foot of the mountain, gradually surrounding it from all sides, thus surrounding the city and using a lot of torches so that it is all illuminated. 2nd Battalion, 3rd Company. The commander shouts that as soon as you light up the enemy, immediately blow the whistle. He sends the knights in different directions with torches and says that if they are not in a hurry to drive the enemies into a dead end, they will be able to fight with everyone without much loss, to which they agree and disperse. One of the commanders blows air into himself, after which he shouts to the soldiers that the left side, and he replies that there are no changes. He looks to the right and shouts to the right side. At this moment, someone attacks the soldier. They tell him that there are no changes, after which he worries and thinks to himself that everything is fine so far. He stops and is surprised that no one is around. I was afraid that my friend was thinking to himself that I should blow the whistle sooner. Then he whistles at it. But at that moment someone grabs him by the neck. And then, with one movement, this neck is twisted, thereby killing the enemy. Then this soldier falls to the ground, and this silhouette stands over him. It was a novel that looks around and at this moment thinks that Hector's kingdom was more decisive than he thought, and he planned to take out Max, attack the defense line, but they are so caught fire at thoughts to eliminate him that even abandoned the 2nd line of defense and their warlord. Then he jumps and runs on. He thinks about something that definitely can't be called mediocre. The soldiers shout that the enemy appeared while under torches, and Roman runs and kills all the enemy, cutting off their heads while they yell for them to check on their comrades nearby. One of the soldiers stands nearby and shouts that they should get together and block the escape route. And at that moment, Roman cuts off his head in one deft move. He smiles and runs on, thinking to himself that he hasn't felt this way in a long time. And he remembers how the 12 sons of the heavenly demon rose to the very bottom. They were forced to constantly prove their abilities just because they were the offspring of a heavenly demon. After that, the father tells Roman that from now on he will live as a demon of darkness for a year. After that, he kills one of the people, saying that his mission was to exterminate the non-choral followers who escaped after causing trouble in the demonic sect. And he successfully dealt with all of them in 3 days. After that, he stands over the broken corpse and thinks to himself that, however, each time the mission became more difficult and even reached the point where it was impossible to keep the victory in a direct duel. So he came to look for others. He was in the library and started reading a lot to the demonic sect storage. He found a fighting technique from the King of Darkness, because the King of Darkness, who was once a petty thief, independently mastered the way to use darkness. What achieved unprecedented power, saying goodbye as a great robber. After that, many people in cloaks stand over the corpse of the King of Darkness. Although he had met a terrible end by coveting the heavenly demon ball, he still managed to make a contribution to the history of his world. After that, he learned all the methods of the King of Darkness, jumping on the beams and honing his skills, and he completed a mission that was not constrained by any methods and means. After that, they looked at him with a terrible aura, because a year had passed like this. After that, he killed 38 named masters in a year after the so-called one. After that, he was nicknamed the ghostly shadow of the demonic sect. After all, he was using the martial art of the King of Darkness and hiding in the dark. And he was the very embodiment of darkness. After that, the soldiers shout, "Where the hell is he?" And in the same second they die. Several soldiers shout that they will take up a forward position. Holding weapons in their hands, they stand in a stance and say that everyone should step back. It was Hector of the Order of Aura Knights who had gathered together. After that, Roman looks at them and says that he will make them regret stepping on a mountain covered in darkness, attacking this Aura Knight from all directions. After that, they kill him and shout to the company commander that he is dead. A soldier nearby, frightened, just falls to the ground, begins to tremble. He thinks to himself what the hell is going on and needs to report it immediately, panicking and crying. He pulls out his communications equipment and shouts that there's a ghost here and they're all going to die soon, and he asks for something to help him. But at that moment, Roman, who is sitting in a tree, attacks him and kills him. Edwin listens to what is happening on the comm transmitter and is very frightened by it, but excited because he can hear the screams of pain there as well. After that, he shouts at the transmitter to focus because the enemy is only using the darkness. A man on the other hand yells that no matter how much they check, he can't see the enemy. He shouts that the soldiers are dying one by one, standing with their sword, and he couldn't count where and how the enemy would attack. He begins to panic and shouts that the commander is impossible to resist the formless ghost. Knight's Order of the Kingdom of Hector Thompson. Edwin is very focused, sharpened, and thinks to himself that Thompson is an aura swordsman. And he thinks about that, remembering what he looks like and what the aura swordsmen use what. They are many times more developed senses than the average soldier and cannot detect even traces of presence, and this simply cannot be. After which, Edwin gritted his teeth and started to worry, thinking to himself that how likely was this magic. He says no, because invisibility magic, neither heat transparent or concealment type magic, certainly exists. But magic initially takes a long time to recover, and it can't be used for long periods of time. After that, these knights continue to kill one by one. Edwin tells them that don't let the darkness blind you, and he will head straight for them. After that, the soldiers, gritting their teeth, think to themselves that there is really no point in being a coward. He recalls how Shaw and his friends and allies are spread out across the county and only need to hold out a little longer, and they will be able to complete the county. They need to hold out until the prince arrives, after which Thompson shouts to everyone that the soldiers of the first company should listen to him. He tells everyone that the enemy is now targeting our lives. They need to form a defensive formation and only fight off the enemy's attacks, after which he puts the means of communication in his pocket. He uses the aura and thinks to himself what is needed. Let him attack. He opens his eye, thinking that he is already there, and launches his attack in that direction. After which, he wonders what he did, thinking about what the hell, and he notices that he killed his own soldier. And he thinks to himself that he used an ally as bait. As he bleeds, the man who stabbed him with the sword calls out to the captain. And Roman stands right in front of him and tell him how many people don't hunt their enemies in the dark, but all of them, as one, will die the same way. After that, Thompson waves his sword around and says that stop cowering and hiding, let him show himself. And Roman starts laughing. From the father at this moment begins to panic very much, afraid of everything that is happening to him. Roman comes out and says that it is a huge mistake to think that the victorious discover the enemy, who could not see. He says he wonders why everyone makes this mistake. Roman stands in front of Thompson and tells him that he really thought that if he could just find him, he could easily put him down. After which Thompson is surprised that I understand that this is Dimitri's novel, and says that he will have to snatch the victory, after which he uses the power of the aura and shouts at him to die. The price of such is not his, and they hit swords with each other, but Roman conducts one of the attacks, thereby killing with one blow, passing forward. And Thompson's blood starts flying everywhere, screaming in pain. Eventually it falls to the ground, and the fragrance moves on. But Thompson is shouting to everyone that everyone should come here, and cancer is here. To which Roman says that it is useless, and he has blocked the sounds of mana, and his voice will not reach the ears of his allies. I don't know how the soldiers pass nearby, but I can't hear anything. Then he plunges his weapon into the man's back once more, and the man screams in pain. He cuts off his legs and arms, with no emotional face. After that, Thompson lies on the ground and makes the last sounds all covered in blood and severed limbs. And then Roman takes the communications equipment out of his pocket and asks if you can hear him. He says that he knows what they are thinking at this moment. What about now, when the country's residents are dying of unprecedented hunger, remembering the drought that has befallen their country? What did you manage? Why did Hector's kingdom go crazy with their lives to attack the southern front with nothing to gain? And it says that there is a single correct answer. Solve the country's problems with war. Roman then proceeds to tell the communications media that he is sure they are going to take a huge sum from Caire, using the southern front as a hostage. But the miscalculation is that he found out about this plan and they don't stand a chance. With such a shortage of food, they did not last more than 3 months. And he says that he will interfere with their plan until the very end. With this, the goal is achieved and they will no longer be able to ignore his presence. Edwin then asks him if he is Roman Dimitri. Roman smiles and thinks to himself that he has finally arrived. Edwin looks at the communications equipment with a serious face and says that he will not deny what he and the kingdom have said. Hector is going through a dry famine, and they can no longer borrow money from outside. And to get out of the rains, having pumped up debts, I perceive everything as a sign of infinity. All they have to do is make that decision. After which, Roman tells Edwin if he is asking him to step into their position. And he says no, it's to explain how desperate they are. It's hard saying this news. Edwin says that the fate of the kingdom depends on this war. Hector, remembering how the knights defend themselves, he says that as soon as he found out that they don't have time, it doesn't mean that they can retreat or even like the corpses of fallen allies, seeing as they put their flag right on top of the allies' corpses. So tell the kingdom and the Cairo family that if they don't get anything, they'll steam the necromancer's corpse poison all over the place, remembering what they look like in the shape of skeletons from the side. And they will turn this land into a land of death. and his name is Edwin Hector. And as the prince of the kingdom of Hector, he is willing to do anything to save his people. And he calls Roman Dmitri to him about what his choice will be, while he listens to all this with a serious face. Edwin asks him if he will go along with Hector's kingdom with chase to the edge of the cliff, or will he cooperate. And Cairo's life depends on his choice. After that, Roman thinks to himself that Edwin Hector, when studying the southern front, he often met with this name. And unlike his useless father, he had taken over the central core of the kingdom through his outstanding abilities, seeing himself as received the title of recognized in the country from abroad. And in addition to everything else, it was he who was entrusted with the command in this war. Remembering how he leads all the soldiers of his country, he thinks to himself that he can't help but acknowledge his ability, but dare to threaten him. Thompson then screams in pain. Edwin asks him what he's doing. He says that his sword has just pierced his thigh, while Thompson is grimacing in pain and shaking, lying on the floor covered in blood. Edwin asks him why he is resorting to torture and it is better to kill him. To which Roman says that whatever the touching reaction, he is not a bit interested in the circumstances of the kingdom of Hector, and he makes a mistake, after which he continues to poke Thompson with his weapon, and Thompson screams in pain. Roman says that the war has already begun, remembering how they attacked the walls of the defensive fortress, and they were the first to cross the line, because they have no right to ask him to show humanity, and he will do what he thinks is right. Then Edwin sat down and was very surprised and frightened. And Roman goes on to say, standing by Thompson's corpse, that so he should try to avoid them and not let any of them live, and even if they decide to run away, raising a white flag, he will follow them to the last and stab them in the back, stabbing her neck again. He says that his name is Roman Dmitri. He says that if they whiten out the desperate resistance, they will meet you soon. He only smiles as he says this, and Edwin is very scared and worried about everything. He thinks to himself that Roman Dmitriev is more dangerous than he realized when he dropped his communication device. Jackson goes to Edwin's tent. He asks him what they plan to do, and he listens in silence. Edwin tells them to immediately mobilize all military forces and create a tight encirclement around the place where the signal came from, using the means of communication that Roman used as a bug. Edwin uses all means of communication with all the anger, says that in the name of revenge for Zadoptin, who died in agony, he personally cuts Roman Dmitri to pieces, to which Jackson says there is. And then the soldiers shout that even if the ally is defeated, let the soldiers from other areas go up into the mountains in a crowd and block the enemy's escape route, holding torches above them. After that, one of the soldiers says that now their eyes are unlikely to see anything and stick a twig directly into the ground. Roman says that this is a tiny grain by human standards, but both a stone and a tree leaf contain natural mana. Tossing bricklayer, tell it all, without leaving any rocks or branches around them. He says that if you artificially redirect this mana, all the soldiers are watching this, and he says that it will distort space. After that, everyone is surprised, stands watching, and Roman says that the enemy will feel as if all 5 of his senses are blocked, and they should only remember that he was right in front of their eyes. After that, the soldiers watch as Roman disappeared and, as if for someone's amusement, hid his existence. And this technique is called formation. A soldier with a torch shouts that you need to sacrifice your own flesh to get the bones of the enemy. And at that moment, a silhouette steps out of the shadows. It was Chris who cut off the head of this soldier in a matter of seconds. Chris gets blood on his face and smiles, thinking that just like the master said, Soldier and Hector didn't notice their presence. And this is the formation. Risk telling everyone to attack their enemy, after which the soldiers settle down and start fighting. One of them screams about what the hell is going on and where they came from. Another tells them not to lose their composure and counterattack. After that, Chris steps forward and says that after the duel of warriors, Chris was reborn as a completely different person. Mana is coming out of his eyes. He recalls how hard he breathed, and to become stronger, he worked tirelessly in joint training with Roman. And just one short delay could prevent him from fully assimilating Roman's teachings. How he was kneeling in front of him, and so he persevered in training, even if he froze down after them. And as a result, the swordsmanship of one of the 10 strongest masters appeared in this world, on top of the last world. And now Chris, using his aura, rushes forward, killing the enemies behind him one by one. Moments later, he killed 3 people by rushing forward with his sword out and calling it a thunderbolt. He stopped and walked around with his soldiers. He thinks to himself that the master ordered all the enemies to be killed, and before more of Hector's soldiers escape here, he shouts at everyone to go back, and they retreat, thinking to themselves that they need to get to another point. At the same time, a battle also unfolded in another area. There are torches in the foothills, and it was the enemy, and they are asking to stop it. It was Kevin, who is walking forward with a heavy gaze covered in blood and a red aura. His comrades called him that. Kevin stands with the head of one of the soldiers covered in blood and slightly missed, and they say that he is a monster that evolves faster than anyone else. The soldiers stand with their backs to it. Kevin goes to them and they think that, taking a place next to the master, he has always observed how to deal with the enemy, and he will pursue the value that the master seeks. Then he smiles and says that the master's methods are absolutely correct. At the same time, one of Mr. Roman's other soldiers attacks the enemies with his blue aura. And elsewhere, the soldiers are heading forward and the volcano mission is complete. Then they stand side by side and look at each other, smiling. And then they show on the map a plan of action that the lightning attack of the army, divided into 4 groups for each branch, was carried out simultaneously. And the strategy has taken hold. Success. After which, one of the soldiers was on his knees. So, reports that there is definitely a mage in Cairo's camp. I'm on my knees in front of Edwin, who tells them that Cairo's soldiers have suddenly appeared out of the empty darkness and attacked them. Jackson, standing nearby, says that, apparently, the enemies have set a trap. And Edwin calls Jackson to him, saying that there is no magic that can teleport a large group of people, and this is only possible by using a magic scroll, remembering how it works. After all, this magic scroll is very expensive. The high circles are under the strict control of the magic tower, and it is unlikely that the meager budget of the Southern Front has such a luxury. Remembering what the huge tower of magic looks like, he sighs and says that in this case there is still the possibility of a magician, but will there be a high circle poppy in the west and south? Does he turn to Jackson? And that it can't be, and Jackson says that it's impossible, because mages are even more valuable than aura swordsmen, considering how strong they are, and most of them belong to the neutral organization Magic Tower. The sign of the Magic Tower, this book with the moon and the sun. After all, the Magic Tower operates all over the continent, and everyone who is naturally endowed with mana dreams of joining its ranks. And the Magic Tower is a storehouse of knowledge, remembering how huge it is and consists of all sorts of devices. Therefore, there is no other way for the magician. And Edwin thinks to himself that because of this, each country has only a small number of magicians. And this is not magic. If they go personally, they will be able to figure out that they used their sister-in-law, but soldiers are now dying for their core. It is as if he is standing on a path with many forks, and it is not yet time to wait for the moment when Roman Dmitri does not fall into his trap. After that, one of the soldiers is stabbed with a sword, and he writhes in pain. It was a novel, and he is told that he finally got caught, smiling at death. After that, Roman is surprised, and suddenly there is a certain flash, and the soldier brings something to Roman's face. Everything starts to shine. Or is someone shouting that this is Roman Dmitri? And while he is trying to escape, everyone shouts that they need to surround him and leave a glowing trail from him. He thinks it's the shards of light that fly out in all directions after the artifact explodes. They covered Roman's entire body like a firefly, giving away his location. And while he is trying to escape from the soldiers, they see him at all. And the soldiers are relaying that Roman Dmitri is heading north, and he just changed direction in the opposite direction. He calls out to Second Company, and at that moment Roman attacks the man who was talking on the COMM, cutting off his arm. I don't hear the rat coming their way, and all the soldiers are motivated, looking and saying that they will kill it, and they must avenge the death of their comrades. They use the Heavenly Demon Sword Technique 2 style. He swipes a huge punch from top to bottom with a purple aura, and he's sitting on his knees, and everything around him has been destroyed. He thinks to himself that his stamina is almost at its limit, and a wounded soldier sitting next to him, leaning against a tree, says whether he thinks he can get out of here alive. And 1,000 soldiers surrounded this place, and no matter how strong it was, he would still die at their hands. Then Roman smiles and says, sweating profusely, that maybe they should have thought about why he personally jumped into this trap. After that, the soldier is surprised and coughs up blood, saying what he means. Roman gets up. Now Nogi says that 1,000 soldiers are flocking from everywhere to pursue him, and pursuing the idea that you need to hold it by any means, at least not even for 30 seconds. And they are often reckless enough to come here foolishly, risking their lives. He smiles as he looks at this from a wounded soldier and says that isn't it fun now, as never before can't act optional, so they should see how far they go, and still have until dawn yet. After that, many soldiers lie bloody and dead. Jackson tells someone to stop standing in front of Roman. He, in turn, tries to finish off another soldier and draws attention to Jackson. He thinks to himself that the light weapons, the scarred face. He looks at Jackson and the fact that he's releasing a huge amount of aura and thinks to himself that it's Ranger Squad leader Jackson. His energy draws at least 4 stars, and Hector hid some of the information. Then Jackson attacks him, and Roman attacks back. Their magic collides with each other and with their swords, and they grimaced very much from how hard the impact was. Jackson screams about finally being caught by Roman Dimitri. Even though Jackson is a 4-star swordsman, his name isn't on Hector's ranking list. Outside of the kingdom, it was only known that he was a ranger squad leader, but since his name wasn't listed in the rankings, no one could say for sure how strong he was. But Roman and Jackson had clashed with their swords in the battle, and there was an incredibly strong aura coming from them. Jackson, after hitting Roman's sword, was startled to think that Roman didn't even move from his attack. Roman, looking at Jackson, smiled. They underestimated Roman Dimitri. In the world he is known as a 3-star swordsman, but this is all a lie. Jackson reflected that a level starting at 4 stars was already a disaster in itself, and now he understood why the soldiers had suffered an inglorious defeat. When Roman was hitting Jackson's sword, a loud sound of iron could be heard. Jackson, gritting his teeth, glared at Roman and wondered if this guy was strong. Roman crouched down, his sword starting to glow with bright pink energy, and then he swung it with great force and struck at Jackson's sword. Jackson wondered if, on the contrary, he was losing ground. He barely dodged Roman's sword as it grazed his cheek, and he thought, okay. He admits that Roman is an outstanding warrior, but Roman doesn't have a chance to escape, so Jackson flew a few meters away from Roman and stopped. Then he took out his whistle. He puffed out in shock and blew into it with great force. Immediately Jackson's soldiers were approaching, shouting that they needed to come here, surround Roman Dimitri. They needed to help Commander Jackson. Roman was surrounded by soldiers armed with torches and swords. Jackson said that enough was enough, let Roman surrender. Romanu smiled, a turquoise aura radiating from him. He asked if it was a funny suggestion to give up, and then said that it looked like Jackson still didn't realize the situation. There was some misunderstanding. Suddenly, Roman's aura changed to purple. Then he said that, first of all, some fragments would not capture him. Jackson looked in Roman's direction, startled, not understanding what was going on. Turquoise shards fell to the floor. They were lying next to Roman when Roman shook his fist and said that, secondly, he was sure that he would break through any environment, even if he was squeezed from all sides. He didn't care. Roman suddenly jumped up from his seat. He was behind a terrified Jackson in a second, and while smiling and telling Jackson that there was no way they could catch him, Jackson wondered what happened when Roman managed to get behind him. Roman, standing behind Jackson, said that, by the way, if he, the commander of the Ranger Squad and a talented warrior of the Kingdom of Hector, is here now, it means that next to Edwin Hector is nobody. Jackson gritted his teeth and started to turn around, thinking that this couldn't be happening. He held out his sword, but Roman wasn't there. And then he shouted, "Damn it," and ordered his warriors to quickly run after Roman, because the prince was in danger. Roman was running at high speed through the forest. He thought that there is only one way to end the war with a small number of soldiers, to kill the enemy commander. As Roman ran through the forest, the purple waves coming off him, he wondered if counting the direction of the communication device's mana that Edwin Hector was using could tell his location. We are taken to Hector's camp at the foot of the mountain, where negotiations are held in a tent. Suddenly, one of Hector's soldiers notices something behind him. Together with his friend, he turns around and sees Roman Dimitri rushing at great speed. Roman Dimitri cuts off the heads of a soldier with one blow, and says that he found them. He jumps, swinging his sword and saying that here he is Edwin Hector. Edwin watches Roman approach with a smile, red energy burning in his hand. Roman is startled to think that Edwin has a different way of using mana. Is he really a magician? Edwin stretches out her arms and uses the Inferno spell, and a magic circle appears in front of her, from which fire rays fly out at high speed. They are rapidly approaching the novel from all directions. Roman dodges them, intending to retreat for a while. Edwin's eyes light up blue, and he shouts where he's going and uses the memorization spell. And then the spell puts, from under the ground begins to pour yellow light. And from there, tree roots come out, surrounded by yellow energy. Roman circles around himself, cutting through the roots with his sword at high speed, then shouts that such magic can't stop him. In response, he shouts how Roman dares to attack the prince. Yellow energy is approaching Roman at great speed. He notices it too late. Roman is engulfed in a yellow light whose intensity is impossible to measure, and Edwin shouts that Roman's arrogance has exceeded all bounds. Roman was able to fend off Edwin's attack with his sword, grazing him quite a bit, and then Roman thought that such a powerful aura is unexpected. Who Edwin is? A man with a yellow mustache hides under a hood. He wonders if Edwin is second in the ranking of the Kingdom of Hector, captain of the Royal Guard. The man takes off his hood. He is clad in armor with a blue cape, and then he shouts, "Roman Dimitri, you will not escape again. This man is a 5-star swordsman butter." Roman turns to look at Edwin, and then they think that, as expected, Edwin has prepared a lot to catch him. Edwin gives Roman a stern look and then wonders what Roman is doing. no matter how much he flutters around. He couldn't stand against the alliance of a 4th circle mage and a 5-star swordsman, who was surrounded, with Butter standing on one side and Butter giving off a yellow aura on the other. Edwin thought that this time he would definitely take Roman's life, and then Edwin used a wind blade. 3 wind streams flew out of his hands, which headed towards Roman at great speed. Butter swung his sword, used yellow energy, and shouted for Roman to die. Roman was greatly frightened by the approaching threat. He did not have time to dodge 2 attacks at once. His eyes lit up with purple flames, and he clenched his teeth with great force. He tried to deflect the wind currents with his sword at the beginning, and then hit Butter's sword. The force of the blow was so strong that it caused an incredibly strong flash. Butter's sword was rapidly closing in on Roman. Romani struggled to use all of his energy to fend off the attacker's attack. From the side, an incredible explosion occurred in the forest. Roman was on one knee, leaning on his sword. He wondered what he expected to be a trap. Looking at Edwin and Butter, he thought that who would have thought that Edwin Hector would turn out to be a mage, and would bring a 5-star swordsman disguised as an ordinary soldier. Roman smiled broadly, then said it was interesting. Roman gave off an incredibly strong energy, and he reflected that now, teetering on the edge between life and death, he finally felt that he was alive. Butter looked at Roman in fright. He wondered if Roman was at the level where he and the prince would be able to withstand a joint attack. Moreover, he was only barely 20 years old. Looking at Roman, who was already on his feet, he wondered where the hell this monster had come from. Fortunately, he was still alive. I haven't reached the batter level yet, but that's still the case. Edwin shouted, Butter, why are you procrastinating? Roman is exhausted right now. Then Edwin raised his hands up and used a double spell, Break and Affirm. While he was casting these spells, Roman managed to jump up to Edwin and swung his sword at him. Just looking at him was enough to make him very scared. Roman smiled, one of his eyes glowing with purple flames, and then he said, Heavenly Demon Sword Technique. Butter charged, shouting no. He was using the 3rd style. Roman's huge black and white energy shot straight at Edwin. But Butter got between Edwin and the energy, both of them in style. Later, when Roman's crushing blow ended, Edwin and Butter were standing together, the ground around them completely burned. Butter asked tiredly how the prince was feeling, and a frightened Edwin said he was fine. Roman coughed up blood, and then thought that to deflect such a blow, not for nothing as a 5-star swordsman, he has already used the Heavenly Demon Sword Technique twice. His strength is at the limit of a pity, but now he can only retreat. Roman looked at the startled Edwin Hector and told him to remember. Roman pointed a finger in his direction and said that when they met again, Edwin won't be able to survive like he did today. Edwin and Butter stood in silence as Roman left. Edwin was overwhelmed. Hector's army was crushed by just one man, and it almost lost its commander. A reality that was completely impossible to accept unfolded right before their eyes. Edwin clenched his fist, and then wondered if it was because of him. He was overconfident. He reasoned that the flaw in Roman Dimitri's face could be corrected. A fleeting decision led the plan that seemed the least evil to the worst outcome. A huge number of fighters were killed. In this fight, Hector was defeated, and Eric initially thought that no, this was still his defeat. He shouted for his comrades to move the body. They should rest their souls with flames, let them enjoy a long rest. Jackson, Butter, and Edwin watched over the many bonfires that were created from their dead comrades. Edwin tilted his head frantically, then said sorry. This is all because of his mistaken decision. One of the soldiers behind Edwin shouted that whatever he was talking about wasn't his fault at all. Jackson agreed to be a soldier and said that neither of them blamed Edwin for this. Edwin was fuming, and Jackson told him that the enemy was simply too strong. Jackson walked over to Edwin and told him to keep his head up. They believe in the prince, and Edwin's mouth dropped open. Jackson and his soldiers stared at Edwin in silence. And then Edwin smiled and said that it was true that Jackson was right, but if it seemed that his order was setting them on the path of defeat again, then they should turn a blind eye to the hierarchy and say it right to his face. The soldiers shouted that they were obeying and obeying. And then Edwin said seriously that from now on, they would throw all their strength into destroying the defensive fortresses of the front before the main force of Cairo arrived. They had all 10 days to do so. After that, they will use the rear as a strong point and begin to prepare for a desperate resistance. Butter desperately asked Edwin what he thought Roman Dimitri would do. Edwin replied that even though he admits that the Roman is a dangerous enemy, but unlike the mountains, which have an advantage in the landscape, the battle on the plain is quite different. Edwin turned sternly to Butter and said enthusiastically that he planned to take advantage of this, and he reflected that even though he had lost, Hector wasn't defeated yet. Jackson asked Edwin if he was sure he could get compensation out of Cairo just by fighting hard, not necessarily getting compensation out of Cairo. Edwin replied with a frown that they would offer a deal to the Chronos Empire. We are transported to the royal castle of Cairo, and someone says that they have already invested a lot of money in the Western Front over the past year due to the frequent provocations from Kronos. We are introduced to a man with a small mustache and a brown jacket, who is the Count of the Kingdom of Cairo. And he says with displeasure that with the current state of the treasury, they simply will not be able to accept all of Hector's conditions. And then he adds, if they fulfill all the requirements, the treasury of the kingdom will be completely empty. The king, looking at the paper, replies that how about we increase taxes? Ire replies that taxes were already raised 6 months ago, and if they increase them again, a mutiny may break out. The king thought that the only way to solve the problem was to use the property of the Cairo aristocracy. But in this case, he would once again give them an excuse to relax the king's power. He takes a deep breath and thinks that there is no other way, and then says to contact the central government aristocracy immediately. They should hold a meeting on cooperation. Suddenly someone bursts in and shouts, "Your Majesty, King Daniel." A soldier runs into the king's office and shouts that a message has arrived from the southern front that the enemy attack has been repelled. King Daniel, startled, asks what. Gregory asks the king that this is true, and then indignantly say that Hector's army consists of about 10,000 soldiers. How did Roman manage to repel the enemy's attack, having a small detachment under his command? If the information is reliable, it means that they have a way out, Denver thought deeply. Dmitry Roman. He actually managed to resolve such a difficult situation. And then King Daniel says that he will immediately contact the southern front and activate the magic crystal. And a light appears that shows Henry. Daniel indignantly asks who he is. Let him state his status and affiliation. Henry, startled, replies that he is the second son of the Elbert family, Henry Elbert. Everyone in the office, they didn't know any Elberts. Suddenly, the Marquis said in a calm voice that the Elbert family line, I remember, had nurtured many outstanding talents in the past, and even held a position in the central government. Henry said it was true. The Marquis replied that all right, they would not leave it aside why he took the call, and not Roman Dmitri. Henry replied that he had joined the squad under Roman Dmitri. Henry went on to say that just as Marquis Benedict had said, the connection should have been accepted by Mr. Roman. But he said that he needed some time alone and left him, the only noble, as his representative. He and Mr. Roman were colleagues in the South Barracks. They were assigned to the reserve unit of the 5th line of defense, and on the way to it they received a report about the attack of the kingdom of Hector. Two shocking news almost threw everyone into confusion. But he and Roman Dmitri, having gathered all the fighting power, hurried to the 5th line of defense, rushing all the speed of the novel Dmitri. The Marquess shouted stop indignantly, and then made a gesture with his hand, and asked if Henry had decided to repeat everything from the beginning. Let him get straight to the point. Henry answered yes. Henry clenched his fist and thought that he was sure that Roman Dmitri would earn fame not only in Cairo, but across the entire continent. Right now, he needed to start a relationship with him before he revealed his true worth. And then Henry said grandly that the success of this plan lay entirely with Mr. Roman. He went on to say that as soon as Roman found out about the Hector Kingdom's attack on the South Barracks, Mr. Roman immediately guessed that their target was the teleportation gate. Roman immediately went up to the mountains, where he set up a secret base. If the commanders of the southern defense lines had listened to Mr. Roman at that time, the southern front would not have fallen so easily. The king, along with the aristocracy, was shocked by Henry's story, and by recognizing the fools, Henry thereby elevated the novel's exploits to the top. Knowing that Roman's subordinates were nearby, listening to his words, Henry purposely raised his voice. Henry closed his eyes and struck an epic pose, then said that they had fought under Mr. Roman's command until dawn, standing up to the end. There were no more than 200 of them, but when Roman took command, they managed to resist an enemy that outnumbered them tenfold. And then Henry clenched his fist and shouted, and win the victory. He and his comrades are ready to stand up to the last against the kingdom of Hector in this war. King Daniel was silent for a long time, and then said that they were weak. He happily replied with a wide smile that Roman Dmitri had fought to the bitter end, despite the hellish conditions. But the so-called top Cairo had already decided to surrender in advance. The Marquis said that His Majesty was right. From the moment Hector captured the teleportation gate, they had already mentally admitted defeat. The Marquis held out his hand and added that at least it proved that the warriors of Cairo have unyielding willpower. Now that the hero of Cairo named Roman Dmitri appeared on the southern front, it was their turn to use the chance given to them to counterattack. Grigory slammed his fist down on the table and shouted for more troops to be sent to the southern front immediately, so that Hector should be taught a lesson when he crossed state borders. King Daniel said in a confident voice that the agreement with Hector would be broken, and from now on, they would focus their efforts on regaining the pride of the Cairo kingdom. Denver, Gregory, and the Marquis came out of the king's study, and King Daniel shouted for the other families to be called together at once to gather all the information about the Southern Front. On the surface, it looked like the central government's aristocrats were trying to protect the south of France, but after the meeting, their ultimate goal focused on one thing: Roman Dmitri. At this moment, they were caught up in the desire to get it. Henry stood in front of the magic stone and wondered if the call had convinced them even more that Roman would join the central government after the war was over. Henry looked back at Roman's soldiers and thought that if he could enlist Roman's support, he could move up the career ladder. Henry held out his hand holding a premium beef jerky and said, "Chris, you must be very hungry, so help yourself." Chris the stern one said no need. Jen decided to follow Chris and asked him to accept it because it is very tasty. Chris suddenly turned around, giving Henry a stern look, and asked him if he thought he didn't understand what Henry was up to. If Henry really wants recognition, then don't try to curry favor with them. And to show that he could be trusted with his back on the battlefield, Henry stood silently, holding a beef jerky in his hands, and thought hard about something. Trusted. Kevin was walking past them, and Henry asked him if his name was Kevin and if he wanted to eat. Kevin paused, puzzled, and Chris watched in silence.